Hello there, and welcome to The Sleepy Scientist. If you found your way here tonight, I hope you're curled up somewhere cozy, maybe under a heavy blanket or nestled into the warm dent of a well-loved pillow. This video is designed to gently carry your mind into the soft spaces between thought and sleep. But fair warning, it might be just interesting enough to keep your brain slightly more alert than you'd planned. If that happens, well, at least you'll drift off with a few new facts quietly orbiting your dreams. Before we begin our journey through light and shadow, through the scientific discoveries that shaped our world, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? What time is it where you are? Is the moon high in your sky, or is the sun just starting to dip behind the hills? Leave a comment if you'd like to share. It's a quiet joy seeing this sleepy little community stretch across the globe. If you enjoy this gentle drift through knowledge, please consider tapping that like button and subscribing to the channel. It helps others find their way here, and it lets me keep making these calm corners of curiosity for you to explore. Now, tonight's story is a bit of a winding one, about the spark of human curiosity and all the ways it has illuminated the world. From the quiet revolution of the printing press to the echoing silence of space, science has a way of changing everything it touches. Sometimes it brings light, sometimes it casts long, unexpected shadows, but more often than not it brings wonder, and with it the tools to build a better world, or at the very least to understand it a little more deeply. So let's take a gentle step back through time and peer into the flickering lantern light of history. The discoveries you'll hear about tonight are mostly bright, stories of healing, learning, and invention, but woven through them are the soft grey strands of consequence, reminder, and responsibility. It's all part of the same story, one of brilliant ideas, and what happens after they leave the lab. And just before we truly begin, a small but important note. This video is intended for entertainment, relaxation, and education. Nothing here should be taken as medical advice or as a substitute for speaking to a qualified professional. Now take a deep breath, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin. It begins, as many great shifts do, with something deceptively simple. A press, a bit of ink, and a man who just wanted to make a Bible easier to copy. Before the printing press, if you wanted a book, you either had to be very rich or very patient, or ideally, both. Creating a single manuscript involved scribes, often monks, painstakingly copying every word by hand, a process that could take months or even years. And while this certainly kept things quiet in the monastery, it didn't exactly encourage mass literacy. Books were rare, expensive, and typically locked away in churches or private libraries. The average person might never see one, let alone own one. Enter Johannes Gutenberg, a goldsmith from Mainz, Germany, in the mid-15th century. Gutenberg was the kind of tinkerer who didn't just accept how things were done, he asked how they could be done. Around the year 1440, he began developing a method of printing that would change everything: movable type. Instead of carving an entire page into a wood block or transcribing by hand, Gutenberg's innovation allowed individual letters cast from metal to be arranged, reused, and inked again and again. The result? A dramatic leap in efficiency. Books that once took years to copy could now be printed in a matter of weeks. His most famous product, the Gutenberg Bible, was completed around 1455. It was beautifully printed, still hand-coloured in places, but mass-producible, at least by medieval standards. This wasn't just an invention. It was a revolution hiding in a stack of pages. It's hard to overstate the importance of this moment. For the first time in European history, knowledge could be replicated with relative ease. Ideas were no longer chained, sometimes quite literally, to the desks of monasteries. They could travel, they could multiply, they could collide with other ideas in new and unpredictable ways. And oh, did they ever. With printing came a rapid spread of literacy. As books became more affordable, more people learned to read. Universities expanded. Scientists began corresponding across countries. The Renaissance bloomed. The Reformation stormed through Europe. Political pamphlets stirred revolutions. All because the flow of information, once a slow and gated trickle, had become a river. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about this. Monks, for one, were understandably annoyed. Imagine spending a decade hunched over a manuscript, only to discover that some clever metal letters and a wine press had made your work obsolete. It's like being replaced by a fax machine in the 15th century. Some even feared that the printing press would lead to a decline in moral and spiritual authority. If anyone could read the Bible, they could also interpret it, and that to the church was both empowering and dangerous. In fact, one of the most significant aftershocks of Gutenberg's invention was the Protestant Reformation. When Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the church door in Wittenberg in 1517, it was the press that gave his ideas legs and wings. Copies of his writings spread rapidly across Europe, igniting debates, challenging doctrines, and shaking the very foundations of religious and political power. This wasn't just about Bibles anymore. The printing press had become a vehicle for dissent. Scientific knowledge, too, flourished. The printing of works by Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and Newton allowed discoveries to reach a wide audience. Scholars could now build upon each other's ideas more rapidly, refining, challenging, and accelerating the scientific method. It was like creating an early version of open-source software, but with gravity, astronomy, and the occasional plague theory. But here's where we start to notice that shadow trailing behind the light. As wonderful as the press was for education and enlightenment, it also enabled the spread of less noble material. False information, fear-mongering pamphlets, and outright propaganda began to flood the market. Some printers, eager for sales, cared more about sensationalism than truth. Sound familiar? The 16th century even had its version of tabloid journalism, lurid broadsheets detailing monstrous births, witches' confessions, or fantastical tales from the New World. It turns out that humans have always had a soft spot for the outrageous. If it bleeds, it leads, even when it's printed on handmade linen paper. And so the printing press, like so many great discoveries, didn't just give rise to knowledge, it gave rise to content, some of it excellent, some of it, well, let's just say questionable. But the genie was out of the bottle. The human appetite for information, true or not, was insatiable. It's worth noting too that not every region embraced the press equally. In the Ottoman Empire, for instance, the printing press faced heavy resistance for centuries. Arabic script printing was banned under penalty of death in many areas, with concerns that it would erode religious authority and tradition. In China, where woodblock printing had been around for centuries, movable type didn't catch on in quite the same way, partly due to the complexity of the character set. So while Gutenberg's invention had a dramatic impact in Europe, its global influence took a slower and more uneven course. Still, the long-term effects were undeniable. The printing press democratized learning in a way that would eventually lead to public education systems, libraries, and the concept that knowledge should be accessible to everyone, not just the elite. It laid the groundwork for modern journalism, scientific journals, and the very idea of a well-informed public. And yes, it also paved the way for cat memes, bad grammar on forums, and 10 shocking reasons why medieval peasants were actually time travelers. You win some, you lose some. But step back for a moment and think about how your evening began. You likely clicked on this video through a digital interface, maybe on your phone or tablet, and here we are sharing thoughts through time and space. None of this would have been possible without Gutenberg's press. The written word, freed from the chains of rarity, set into motion a centuries-long conversation between minds, a conversation you are now part of. So the next time you glance at a book spine on your shelf, or scroll through an article online, or even just listen to someone like me ramble soothingly about 15th century German inventors, remember the quiet beginnings of that power. A little press, a little ink, a man with a dream, and the world forever changed. Not bad for a guy who probably just wanted to make fewer spelling mistakes copying the Psalms. Let us now lift our gaze from the printed page to the night sky, vast, mysterious, and for most of human history frustratingly out of reach. Long before telescopes existed, people looked up and wondered. They charted stars by hand, told stories through constellations, and used the moon and sun to guide planting, sailing, and celebration. But those glittering dots remained largely symbolic, celestial wallpaper painted on by the gods. We could admire them, but we couldn't truly know them. Then came a simple question. What if we could see closer? The telescope, like many great inventions, wasn't born from a single mind, but from a series of curious tinkerers poking around with lenses. In the early 17th century, Dutch spectacle makers discovered that combining convex and concave lenses in just the right way made distant objects appear closer. At first, it was a novelty, useful for watching ships approach from afar, or perhaps for a nosy peek into your neighbour's orchard. But one Italian man saw something far more profound. Galileo Galilei didn't invent the telescope, but he was the first to point it at the heavens with serious scientific intent. Around the year 1690, he built his own improved version of the instrument and turned it skyward. What he saw shattered centuries of assumptions. First, the moon, that familiar glowing face in the sky, was not the smooth, perfect sphere imagined by philosophers. It was pocked with craters, ridges, and shadows. It looked imperfect, Earth-like, tangible. Then came Jupiter. Galileo discovered 4 tiny moons orbiting it, dancing around the gas giant like moths around a lamp. This too was revolutionary. Until then, everything was believed to orbit the Earth. But here were celestial bodies clearly revolving around something else. He kept going. He saw the phases of Venus, which confirmed that it orbited the Sun. He saw countless stars invisible to the naked eye. He even noticed sunspots, blemishes on the Sun's otherwise pure surface. With every observation, the old model of the cosmos, a neat Earth-centered system dreamed up by Aristotle and refined by Ptolemy, crumbled a little more. Galileo's discoveries weren't just astronomical, they were philosophical. If the Earth wasn't the center of the universe, then maybe, just maybe, humans weren't the center of everything either. And for an era still deeply entwined with religious dogma, that was a deeply unsettling idea. Predictably, it didn't go over smoothly. In 1633, Galileo was summoned before the Roman Inquisition, accused of heresy for supporting the heliocentric model proposed by Copernicus, the radical notion that the Earth revolved around the Sun, not the other way around. He was forced to recant and spent the rest of his life under house arrest. Legend has it that as he left the courtroom, he muttered, "Et pour si mauve," and yet it moves. Whether or not he actually said it, the sentiment stuck. The Earth didn't care who believed it moved. It did, and now someone had seen the proof. The telescope, it turned out, didn't just offer new sights, it offered new perspectives. It introduced humility, it challenged pride, and it began to change how we thought about our place in the cosmos. Over the following centuries, the telescope evolved into ever more powerful forms. In the late 17th century, Isaac Newton devised a reflecting telescope that used mirrors instead of lenses, improving clarity and reducing distortion. Astronomers like William Herschel used such instruments to discover new planets, Uranus, for example, which had been quietly minding its business at the edge of the solar system, until Herschel spotted it in 1781. Then came nebulae, clusters, galaxies. The deeper we looked, the more it became clear that the universe was big, staggeringly so. And we? Tiny. A single blue speck floating in a sea of stars. By the 20th century, telescopes were moving beyond mountaintops and into space itself. In 1990, the Hubble Space Telescope was launched into orbit, free from the blurring effects of Earth's atmosphere. Hubble gave us images of galaxies being born, stars dying, and the cosmic fabric stretching across unimaginable distances. It also gave us the famous deep field image, a long exposure of a seemingly empty patch of sky that revealed thousands of galaxies hiding in the darkness. It was as if the universe had been whispering to us all along, and we'd only just gotten a good enough hearing aid to listen. But the light of discovery also cast shadows. One of the first, perhaps unexpected consequences of telescopic astronomy was existential discomfort. If the universe was infinite, or nearly so, what did that mean for humanity's role in it? What did it mean for our beliefs, our myths, our sense of destiny? The comforting idea of a purpose-built universe centered around us began to fade. For some, this was liberating. For others, it was disorienting, even terrifying. The telescope also made warfare more precise. Optical advancements helped develop periscopes, rangefinders, and early targeting systems. And while those weren't quite Galileo's fault, he was already in enough trouble. The tools born from his legacy found uses far beyond astronomy. Even in modern times, space telescopes and observatories have become points of geopolitical competition. The desire to be the first to see, to map, to claim understanding, it echoes the same ambition that drove colonial explorers centuries ago, but now turned skyward. Yet for all the shadows, the telescope remains one of humanity's most poetic inventions. It's a tool of curiosity, of humility, of longing. We build bigger and better versions, not just to gather data, but to chase wonder. The James Webb Space Telescope, launched in 2021, now peers into the earliest light of the universe, light that has been travelling for over 13 billion years just to meet our gaze. That's a humbling thought. Somewhere in the vast silence of space, photons from ancient stars cross the void, landing on a polished mirror engineered by people who just wanted to understand where we came from. And then there's the emotional side. The pale blue dot photograph, taken by the Voyager spacecraft at Carl Sagan's suggestion, shows Earth as a mere speck suspended in a sunbeam, a reminder of our fragility, our unity, and our cosmic smallness. Everyone you love, everyone you know, Sagan said, every human being who ever was lived out their lives on that dot. Telescopes do that. They show us not only where we are, but who we are. They also remind us of what we don't know: dark matter, dark energy, black holes. We see their effects, but we don't fully understand them. It's a cosmic invitation to keep asking questions, politely, humbly, and often with a cup of tea at hand. It's worth pausing for a moment to appreciate how beautifully odd this all is. Thousands of years ago, someone might have gazed up at the sky and seen Orion, imagining it as a hunter chasing prey. Today, we still look up, still wonder, but now we know that those stars are suns, scattered across space like glowing breadcrumbs. The stories have changed, the awe has not. And as you lie here listening, perhaps the stars are above you now, distant, patient, unchanged by our dramas. Maybe they twinkle behind a veil of clouds, or glow in the crisp stillness of a rural night. Or maybe you're in a city, and the stars are drowned out by streetlights and high-rises. But even then, they're there, just as they've always been. The telescope didn't invent the stars, it just helped to see them better, and in doing so, it helped us see ourselves a little more clearly too. In the beginning, there was darkness, and then, at some point, humanity figured out how to make light, not with fire or candles, but with something far stranger: the movement of invisible forces, channeled through wire, sparking into bulbs, buzzing through cities and humming quietly behind the scenes of modern life. Electricity. It's so woven into our daily existence now that it's hard to remember how recently it arrived. We flip switches without thinking. Our phones glow on demand. Refrigerators hum. Toothbrushes vibrate. Even our doorbells have opinions now. But not so long ago, people lit their homes with whale oil and warmed themselves by stoking fires that smoked up the rafters. Electricity didn't just brighten the night. It changed what it meant to live in the modern world. The story of electricity is a winding one, full of curious experiments, heated rivalries, and a few accidental electrocutions. It begins, in a sense, with the ancient Greeks, who noticed that rubbing amber with fur made it attract small bits of straw. The word electricity actually comes from the Greek word for amber, electron. But for centuries, this strange property remained a parlor trick, a curiosity rather than a field of study. Things began to spark, quite literally, in the 18th century. Benjamin Franklin famously flew a kite in a thunderstorm to prove that lightning was a form of electricity. Sounds like something out of a cartoon, and frankly, it was dangerous enough to qualify. Armed with a metal key and what must have been an impressive amount of stubbornness, Franklin showed that the sparks from lightning and those from his Leyden jar, a kind of early capacitor, were related. Fortunately, he survived, and the idea that electricity was a natural force began to take root. In the 19th century, things really began to light up. Michael Faraday, an English scientist with no formal education, made one of the most important discoveries in physics: electromagnetic induction. In 1831, he found that moving a magnet through a coil of wire could generate an electric current. This was the birth of the electric generator, a way to create electricity, not just store or transfer it. Faraday's simple setup is the ancestor of every power plant in operation today. And then came the race to harness and deliver this invisible energy to the world. Thomas Edison, a name almost synonymous with invention, was a champion of direct current, or DC electricity. His version of electrical delivery was reliable over short distances, and he built the first practical electric light bulb. After trying over 1,000 different filament materials, including, rumour has it, fried cotton and even strands of his own hair, Edison's Menlo Park lab became a powerhouse of invention, cranking out patents like a popcorn machine. But Edison had a rival, Nikola Tesla. A Serbian-born engineer with a flair for the dramatic, Tesla championed alternating current, or AC electricity. Unlike direct current, which flows in one direction, alternating current switches direction many times per second. This allowed it to be transmitted over much greater distances with less energy loss, a crucial advantage for lighting up entire cities. The two inventors clashed in what became known as the War of the Currents. Edison, ever the showman, went so far as to electrocute animals, including, tragically, an elephant named Topsy, to demonstrate how dangerous AC was. Tesla, undeterred, demonstrated the safety of his system by letting current flow through his own body and using it to light bulbs in his hand, all while looking like he had just walked off the set of a Gothic novel. Ultimately, Tesla's system won. The world runs on alternating current today, and power stations based on his principles form the backbone of modern civilization. Once electricity began to flow, the pace of innovation accelerated. By the early 20th century, homes were being wired, factories were lit, and cities glowed like constellations come to Earth. The incandescent light bulb became a symbol of progress, a literal bright idea. Electricity didn't just illuminate, it powered motors, allowing for elevators, washing machines, electric trams, and eventually computers. It transformed communication, enabling telegraphs, telephones, and radio. It fueled entertainment, first with phonographs, then movies, then television, and now streaming services that recommend documentaries about cave-dwelling salamanders at 3 in the morning. At the same time, it created whole new landscapes: the tangled wires of early utility poles, the blinking neon of downtown theaters, the humming substations tucked away on quiet streets. Electricity became infrastructure, invisible yet indispensable, a hidden river coursing through the walls. Of course, the shadow of all this brilliance is the source. Most of our electricity, even now, comes from burning fossil fuels: coal, oil, natural gas. These processes release carbon dioxide and other pollutants, contributing significantly to climate change. The invention that lit the world also helped warm it, slowly and dangerously. There have been alternatives. Hydroelectric dams channel the force of water, wind turbines harvest the air, solar panels drink the sun, and nuclear power, while powerful and relatively clean in terms of emissions, carries its own risks, as places like Chernobyl and Fukushima have reminded us. Even at the human level, electricity has its dangers. It shocks, it arcs, it can kill. Linemen work daily with currents that could stop a heart in less than a second. We've tamed it, yes, but only by respecting its power. And yet, it's hard not to marvel. Consider what happens when you plug in your phone. Somewhere possibly hundreds of miles away, water spins a turbine, or a solar panel converts sunlight, or a coil burns coal. That energy travels across transmission lines, through substations, along transformers, through wires in your neighborhood, into your home, and finally into the little rectangular device in your hand. And all you did was tap a cable into place. We live in a world where electric current can animate metal limbs, restore hearing through cochlear implants, and even restart a heart with a well-placed defibrillator. Pacemakers keep silent rhythms in aging chests. Deep brain stimulators reduce tremors in Parkinson's patients. Entire bodies move thanks to carefully managed flows of electrons. And then there's the whimsical side, lava lamps powered by sockets, electric toothbrushes that judge your technique, novelty socks that warm your toes. It's not all life or death circuitry. Sometimes it's just comfort and convenience in a 21st century shell. It's worth remembering too that electricity is not just something humans created, it's something we discovered. Nature has been playing with electric charges for billions of years. Lightning splits the sky with terrifying beauty. Electric eels patrol murky waters with their own built-in stun guns. Even our own brains run on tiny electrochemical impulses. Every thought, every dream, every sleepy notion drifting through your head right now is, at its core, a pattern of charges moving across neural circuits. So in a sense, the current running through a power line and the one firing in your brain are cousins. One illuminates a room, the other illuminates your thoughts. That's not bad for a force we first noticed, because a piece of amber picked up some straw. Electricity may be invisible, but it leaves its fingerprints everywhere. In the glow of a street lamp, in the hum of your fridge, in the warmth of a heated blanket, in the gentle voice of a video playing just before bed. It's both marvel and menace, whisper and roar. It changed the night, the home, the city, the world. And perhaps most remarkably, it did so without asking for applause. Electricity just flows, quiet, tireless, waiting for the next switch to be flipped. It's easy to forget in our world of hand sanitizer and sterile packaging that there was a time when simply going to the doctor could be the most dangerous decision of your life. Before the late 19th century, hospitals were less like healing centers and more like experimental waiting rooms for infection. Surgeons performed operations in street clothes. Instruments were used on patient after patient without cleaning. And as for hand washing, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly trending. The mystery of why some patients healed and others succumbed to fevers and infections wasn't just frustrating, it was tragic. Theories abounded, most of them wrong. Some believed in miasmas, or bad air, as the cause of disease. Others suspected imbalances in the body's humours, blood, phlegm, black bile and yellow bile, which sounds more like the contents of a medieval stew than the foundation of a medical theory. And then, slowly, something invisible began to come into focus. The idea that sickness might be caused not by air or imbalance, but by tiny living things, creatures too small to see, yet powerful enough to end a life. This was the dawn of germ theory, one of the most important scientific breakthroughs in human history. The path to this understanding wasn't straightforward, and it didn't arrive with trumpets and applause. It arrived, as so many scientific revolutions do, with careful observation, a few very brave experiments, and a lot of resistance from people who were quite comfortable with the way things had always been. One of the earliest hints came from a Hungarian physician named Ignaz Semmelweis in the 1840s. While working at the Vienna General Hospital, Semmelweis noticed something peculiar. The maternity ward, staffed by doctors and medical students, had a much higher mortality rate than the one run by midwives. The difference. The doctors often came straight from performing autopsies and went directly to deliver babies, without washing their hands. Semmelweis proposed a radical solution. What if the doctors simply washed their hands with a chlorinated solution? The result was dramatic. Mortality rates in the doctor-staffed ward plummeted. Semmelweis had effectively discovered that something, he didn't know what, was being transferred from the dead to the living, but his ideas weren't welcomed. The medical community rejected his findings and he died in obscurity, never knowing that he was one of the first to truly grasp the concept of infection control. Then came Louis Pasteur, a French chemist with a fascination for fermentation. In the 1850s and 60s, Pasteur was trying to solve problems in the wine industry, which was experiencing spoilage on a massive scale. What he discovered was that microorganisms, tiny living things, were responsible for the process of fermentation. And if they could spoil wine and milk, he reasoned, perhaps they could also cause disease. Pasteur's work laid the groundwork for the concept that germs, bacteria in this case, were behind many illnesses. He developed the process of pasteurization, heating liquids to kill off harmful microbes, which remains a cornerstone of food safety today. He also developed vaccines for rabies and anthrax and helped establish the discipline of microbiology. But perhaps his most enduring contribution was the idea that cleanliness could prevent illness, not just in food, but in people. Building on this momentum was Joseph Lister, a British surgeon who in the 1860s began applying Pasteur's principles to surgical practice. Lister introduced the use of carbolic acid to sterilize surgical instruments and clean wounds. He also encouraged surgeons to wash their hands and wear clean gloves. At the time, this was considered somewhat eccentric. The surgical profession had not yet embraced the idea of hygiene as a medical necessity. But again, the results spoke volumes. Infection rates dropped, survival rates improved. Lister's methods spread, slowly at first, then more rapidly, until antiseptic technique became standard practice. If you've ever had a routine surgery or even a bandage applied with sterile gauze, you can thank Lister and his insistence on the unseen world of microbes. All of this, from Semmelweis to Lister, might sound obvious today. Of course you wash your hands. Of course hospitals should be clean. But at the time, these ideas upended centuries of medical practice. They asked physicians to believe in something they couldn't see. It took courage and a fair amount of humility to admit that illness might come not from divine punishment or corrupted air, but from something as simple as not scrubbing your fingers properly. With germ theory firmly in place, medicine took a giant leap forward. Scientists could now identify specific bacteria as causes of disease. Robert Koch, a German physician, isolated the bacteria responsible for tuberculosis, cholera, and anthrax. His work established what are still known as Koch's postulates, a set of criteria used to determine whether a particular microorganism causes a specific disease. Laboratories sprang to life. Microscopes became portals to a hidden world. Suddenly, diseases that had plagued humanity for centuries had names, faces, and eventually are treatments. Germ theory also revolutionized public health. Water systems were overhauled to prevent the spread of cholera. Quarantine measures became more scientifically informed. Sanitation departments were created. The very idea of a clean city, with sewers, trash removal, and safe drinking water, was born from this microbial revelation. The ripple effects were enormous. Life expectancy increased. Childhood mortality dropped. Surgeries that were once death sentences became routine. Childbirth became safer. Even dentistry got an upgrade, though perhaps that's not everyone's favourite silver lining. But for all the light germ theory cast, it also revealed a few shadows. One of the most persistent is the challenge of overconfidence. With the discovery of bacteria and the development of antibiotics, which we'll explore later, came the illusion that humanity had conquered infection. For a time it seemed that we had. Diseases that once ravaged entire populations could be prevented or cured. But nature, as it turns out, is an excellent strategist. Some bacteria developed resistance, others evolved in ways we didn't anticipate, and not all diseases are bacterial. Viruses, which aren't technically alive in the traditional sense, operate on a different biological rulebook. It took decades before scientists could even see them properly, let alone understand them. The COVID-19 pandemic served as a stark reminder that the microbial world is still very much in charge. Despite all our knowledge, one tiny strand of RNA, invisible to the naked eye, brought the world to a standstill. Masks, quarantine, hand hygiene, the lessons of Pasteur and Semmelweis came roaring back into the spotlight. Germ theory also changed how we relate to the world around us. It introduced a kind of microscopic paranoia. Every doorknob became a potential threat, every sneeze a missile. Marketing campaigns latched onto this anxiety, enter the era of antibacterial soaps, disinfectant sprays and wipes, promising to kill 99.9% of germs. That remaining 0.1%, by the way, is always mysteriously vague. It's probably just watching and waiting. We live in a microbial world, whether we like it or not. In fact, not all microbes are villains. Many bacteria are helpful, even essential. Our digestive systems are home to trillions of microbes that help us process food, regulate our immune systems, and maybe, just maybe, influence our mood. The human microbiome is still a frontier of discovery, but it's already clear that some germs are more friends than foes. And so, like many great scientific shifts, germ theory didn't just give us answers. It gave us a new lens through which to see the world. A world where tiny organisms can topple empires or keep your gut healthy. A world where washing your hands is both a public service and an act of self-care. A world where the invisible matters more than we ever imagined. It's a quiet revolution, this one. No parades, no fireworks. Just clean hands, sterile instruments, safe water, and a growing understanding that the things we cannot see are often the ones most worth paying attention to. Not bad for an idea that started with a Hungarian doctor, a bowl of chlorinated lime water, and a stubborn refusal to believe that death in childbirth was just part of the natural order. In the end, the world didn't change because we found something big. It changed because we looked closer. And in doing so, we found a universe hidden in the smallest places. Imagine living in a world where smallpox still stalks the streets, where polio twists the limbs of children every summer, where measles, mumps, and rubella sweep through communities unchecked. Now imagine defending yourself against these invisible threats not with medicine, but with the vague hope of clean air, good luck, or perhaps the occasional folk remedy involving garlic, leeches, or bathing in wine. For most of human history, this was the best we could do. Then came one of the most powerful and quietly heroic inventions in medical science, the vaccine. The story of vaccines begins, rather unexpectedly, with cows. In the late 18th century, English physician Edward Jenner noticed something peculiar. Milkmaids, young women who spent their days tending cows, seemed oddly resistant to smallpox, a disease that had devastated populations for centuries. While others bore the pockmarked scars of survival, or had not survived at all, milkmaids often escaped unscathed. Jenner dug deeper and found that these milkmaids frequently contracted cowpox, a much milder disease that caused similar pustules but rarely led to serious illness. He wondered, could this humble infection be protecting them from the much more dangerous smallpox? In 1796, Jenner decided to test his theory. He took material from a cowpox sore on a milkmaid's hand and introduced it into a cut on the arm of an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps. A few weeks later, Jenner exposed the boy to smallpox. Ethically questionable, but scientifically revealing. The boy did not get sick. The cowpox had, in effect, trained his immune system to fight a deadlier foe. Jenner called this process vaccination, from the Latin vacca, meaning cow. The name stuck, as did the concept. Over time, the method was refined, standardized, and eventually transformed into one of the greatest tools for public health the world has ever known. Smallpox, the disease that inspired Jenner's work, was once a global scourge. It killed about 1 in every 3 people it infected. Survivors were often left blind or disfigured. By the 20th century, it still claimed millions of lives each year. But thanks to widespread vaccination efforts, smallpox was officially declared eradicated by the World Health Organization in 1980. It remains the only human disease to have been completely wiped out. Vaccines work by teaching the immune system to recognize a pathogen without causing illness. They expose the body to a harmless version or piece of the germ, perhaps a weakened virus, a killed bacterium, or just a fragment of its protein shell. This gives the immune system a safe training session, like a fire drill for your cells. If the real invader shows up later, your body already knows how to fight it off. Over the centuries, scientists built on Jenner's foundation. Louis Pasteur, the same man who gave us pasteurization and major contributions to germ theory, developed vaccines for rabies and anthrax. In the 20th century, Jonas Salk and Albert Sabin developed competing vaccines for polio, a disease that paralyzed tens of thousands each year. The Salk vaccine, introduced in 1955, used an inactivated virus and was delivered by injection. Sabin's oral vaccine, easier to administer and often given on sugar cubes, came a few years later. Together they brought polio to its knees in many parts of the world. Vaccines now protect us from a host of once-feared diseases: measles, mumps, rubella, hepatitis, tetanus, diphtheria, pertussis, influenza, and more. Childhood vaccinations have become so routine in many countries that people forget how devastating these illnesses used to be. That is, until an outbreak reminds us. For example, measles, once responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths annually, can still erupt in communities with low vaccination rates. It's a sobering reminder that diseases never really go away. They just lie in wait for a lapse in vigilance. The benefits of vaccination aren't limited to individuals. There's also something called herd immunity. When a large enough portion of a population is immune, it becomes much harder for a disease to spread. This protects people who can't be vaccinated, infants, the elderly, those with compromised immune systems, by forming a kind of protective buffer around them. In a sense, every time you get a vaccine, you're not just protecting yourself, you're extending a shield to those around you. Vaccines have also played a crucial role in travel, military readiness, and global development. They've enabled humanitarian workers to operate in outbreak zones. They've kept diseases from spreading across continents. And in recent years, they've shown just how fast science can move when the world is watching. When COVID-19 emerged in late 2019, it posed a challenge unlike any seen in generations. Within a year, scientists developed multiple vaccines using different platforms, including the innovative messenger RNA or mRNA technology. Unlike traditional vaccines, mRNA vaccines deliver a genetic blueprint that instructs cells to make a harmless piece of the virus, prompting an immune response. It's a bit like showing your immune system a wanted poster and saying, "Oh, keep an eye out for this one." The success of mRNA vaccines, including those developed by Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna, has opened doors for future vaccines against other diseases, from influenza to certain cancers. It's a whole new chapter in immunology, and one that's still being written. Of course, as with many scientific advances, vaccines are not without controversy. They have side effects, usually minor, like soreness or a low-grade fever, but sometimes more serious in rare cases. They raise ethical questions about individual choice versus collective responsibility, and they've become flashpoints for misinformation, especially in the age of social media. Some resistance to vaccination is based on mistrust, past medical abuses, or cultural beliefs. Other opposition is fueled by conspiracy theories or fear of the unknown. It's a deeply human response. We're cautious about what we put into our bodies, especially when the threat feels distant or invisible. But vaccines, unlike many tools in modern medicine, are preventative. They don't just treat illness, they stop it from happening. They are one of the few interventions that can eliminate a disease entirely, not just manage its symptoms, and that makes them extraordinary. There's also a poetic beauty in how vaccines work. Your body, without you even realizing it, learns and remembers. It builds defenses against threats you may never encounter. It carries the wisdom of microbial battles fought and won, a biological memoir written in antibodies and white blood cells. Vaccines are quiet. They don't demand applause. They don't advertise their effectiveness with flashy symptoms. They simply do their job, day in and day out, protecting millions of people without ceremony. They also represent something else: cooperation. Vaccines are the product of scientists, doctors, researchers, nurses, policymakers, and entire communities working together. They require global coordination, stable supply chains, effective communication, and trust. They are in many ways a symbol of what we can achieve when we act with collective purpose. But like all tools of progress, they come with responsibilities: to stay informed, to listen to evidence, to engage with empathy, to understand that public health is not a solo endeavor. It's something we build together. Vaccination may have started with a cow and a curious doctor, but it has grown into one of humanity's greatest defenses, a shield forged not from steel or stone, but from knowledge, persistence, and a bit of biological trickery. A whisper to the immune system: here's what danger looks like, be ready. And that quiet whisper has saved more lives than perhaps any other invention in history. So the next time you roll up your sleeve or gently wipe a child's tear after a quick poke from a needle, remember the invisible army now standing guard inside, a gift from science, a promise of protection, and a reminder that sometimes the smallest things make the biggest difference. There are moments in scientific history that feel like thunderclaps, not because of the noise they make at the time, but because of the way their echoes reshape everything that follows. The splitting of the atom was one of those moments, a single, stunning discovery that unlocked immense power, promised limitless energy, and cast the longest shadow of all. It was a triumph of human curiosity and a sobering lesson in just how quickly knowledge can outpace wisdom. The atom, for most of history, was thought to be the smallest unit of matter, the indivisible building block of everything. The word atom comes from the Greek atomos, meaning uncuttable. For a long time, that was the assumption, that atoms were fundamental, solid particles that made up all matter. But as physicists dug deeper, it became clear that atoms were not solid marbles, but little universes of their own, with swirling electrons orbiting dense cores of protons and neutrons. And then came the realization that these cores, these nuclei, could be split. In the 1930s, physicists around the world were racing to understand the structure of the atom. In 1938, in a laboratory in Berlin, German chemists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann bombarded uranium atoms with neutrons and observed something unexpected. The uranium atoms split into smaller elements. It was the Austrian-Swedish physicist Lise Meitner, working in exile because of the Nazi regime, who provided the explanation. Along with her nephew Otto Frisch, she described the process as nuclear fission, the splitting of an atom's nucleus, releasing a tremendous amount of energy. To put it in perspective, when an atom undergoes fission, a tiny amount of its mass is converted into energy according to Einstein's famous equation, E equals mc squared. Because the speed of light squared is such a huge number, even a minuscule amount of mass can produce an enormous explosion of energy. Scientists realized very quickly what this meant. If fission could be controlled, it could be used to generate electricity. If it couldn't be controlled, or if it was deliberately unleashed all at once, it could become the most powerful weapon ever built. This realization led to one of the most secretive and consequential scientific collaborations in history, the Manhattan Project. In the early 1940s, as World War II raged on, the United States, along with the United Kingdom and Canada, launched a massive research effort to develop an atomic bomb before Nazi Germany could do the same. It brought together some of the brightest minds in physics, including Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, Niels Bohr, and many others. The project was vast, expensive, and shrouded in secrecy. Entire cities were built from scratch: Los Alamos in New Mexico, Oak Ridge in Tennessee, Hanford in Washington, solely to support nuclear research and production. Tens of thousands of people worked on the project, many without knowing what exactly they were building. The scientists knew, though, and when the first bomb was tested on July 16th, 1945, in the New Mexico desert, it became instantly clear that they had succeeded. The test, codenamed Trinity, unleashed an explosion equivalent to around 20,000 tons of TNT. The flash was visible for over 100 miles. The shockwave rattled the ground, and a mushroom cloud rose high into the sky. Oppenheimer later recalled a line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." Just weeks later, atomic bombs were dropped on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation was immediate and overwhelming. Over 100,000 people were killed instantly, and many more died from radiation sickness in the months that followed. Buildings vanished, shadows were burned into stone. Entire generations were shaped by the decision to use this terrifying new power. It was the moment when humanity entered the atomic age, an age defined not just by scientific achievement, but by a deep and enduring anxiety about what we had unleashed. But even in the aftermath of destruction, scientists saw another possibility. The same principles that powered a bomb could also power a city, cleanly, efficiently, and on a scale never before imagined. Nuclear fission could be harnessed in a controlled environment to boil water, spin turbines, and generate electricity. No coal smoke, no soot, just an elegant chain reaction, carefully managed. In 1951, the first usable electricity from a nuclear reactor was produced in Idaho, lighting 4 simple bulbs. It was a small flicker, but it signaled the beginning of a new energy era. nuclear power plants began popping up across the globe. They offered a tantalizing promise: vast amounts of energy with very low greenhouse gas emissions. In countries with limited fossil fuel resources, nuclear energy became a vital part of the energy mix. France, for instance, generates over 70% of its electricity from nuclear power. It is one of the world's leaders in low-carbon energy production, thanks in large part to its embrace of the atom. And yet, the shadow of risk has never quite disappeared. In 1979, the 3 Mile Island accident in Pennsylvania brought the dangers of nuclear energy into the public eye. A partial meltdown in one of the reactors released a small amount of radioactive gas, sparking widespread fear and a major shift in energy policy. While no one was killed, the incident shattered public confidence. Then came Chernobyl. On April 26, 1986, in what is now Ukraine, a reactor at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant exploded during a safety test gone wrong. The result was catastrophic. A massive release of radioactive material spread across Europe. Entire towns were evacuated. First responders died from acute radiation sickness. The long-term health and environmental consequences are still being studied. The Chernobyl exclusion zone remains one of the most haunting reminders of what can happen when nuclear energy goes wrong. More recently, in 2011, a massive earthquake and tsunami struck Japan, causing a meltdown at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Again, while the immediate death toll was low, the long-term displacement, cleanup and psychological toll were immense. Images of reactor buildings blown apart by hydrogen explosions reignited debates about the safety of nuclear energy. It's a paradox. Nuclear power is simultaneously one of the cleanest and one of the most feared energy sources on the planet. It produces no carbon emissions during operation. It's incredibly efficient, and it can reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, but it also produces radioactive waste that must be carefully stored for thousands of years, and it carries the potential for rare but catastrophic failures. Then there's the matter of nuclear weapons. The same technologies that power reactors can, with a few changes, be used to enrich uranium or produce plutonium for bombs. The line between civilian and military nuclear technology is thin. This dual-use nature makes nuclear science uniquely political. Treaties, inspections, and international oversight are all part of managing the atom's dangerous potential. And yet, it's important to remember that the atom by itself is neutral. It has no intent. It's neither good nor evil. The energy it contains is just that. Energy. What we do with it is up to us. In recent years, there has been renewed interest in nuclear power as a solution to climate change. Advanced reactor designs promise safer, smaller, and more efficient plants. Thorium, an alternative to uranium, could offer fuel that's more abundant and less prone to weaponization. Fusion power, the process that powers the sun, remains an ambitious dream, one that scientists are slowly inching closer to realizing. Unlike fission, fusion produces no long-lived radioactive waste and carries no risk of meltdown. But achieving it requires sustaining temperatures hotter than the core of the sun. Not exactly something you can plug into a wall socket. Still, research continues. Because the atom holds more than just energy. It holds hope. A hope that we can learn from our mistakes, that we can use our knowledge wisely, that we can build a future where power does not come at the cost of destruction. The splitting of the atom was a marvel of intellect. It took thousands of years of scientific curiosity, from Greek philosophers pondering indivisible particles to modern physicists solving equations on chalkboards to reach that point. But with that power came a burden, a responsibility not just to understand, but to choose carefully. And that's what science often demands of us. Not just discovery, but discernment. The ability to ask not only, can we do this, but also, should we? In the light of the atom, we see both sides of human nature, our brilliance, our ambition, our endless drive to understand, and our fear, our fallibility, our occasional failure to see past the immediate to the long term. It is both light and shadow, energy and danger, progress and warning, and it all began with a tiny nucleus, split by a curious mind, and forever reshaping the course of history. Sometimes the most extraordinary discoveries arrive not in flashes of brilliance or lightning bolts of insight, but in mouldy petri dishes and a healthy dose of curiosity. Antibiotics, those tiny microbial miracle workers that revolutionize medicine, didn't emerge from a grand scientific plan or a gleaming laboratory. They started with something that looked suspiciously like poor housekeeping. It was the year 1928. Alexander Fleming, a Scottish bacteriologist with a reputation for being both brilliant and a bit messy, returned from a vacation to his cluttered lab at St Mary's Hospital in London. He began sorting through his petri dishes, as one does after a holiday, and noticed something odd. One of the dishes containing Staphylococcus bacteria, those nasty little bugs responsible for everything from minor skin infections to life-threatening illnesses, had a patch where the bacteria simply weren't growing. At the center of this bacterial no-go zone was a strange blob of mold. Instead of tossing it out, Fleming leaned in. He identified the mold as Penicillium notatum and concluded that it was releasing a substance that killed the bacteria. He named this mysterious antibacterial compound penicillin. Now, if this were a movie, that moment would be immediately followed by a montage of penicillin being mass-produced, illnesses being cured, and medals being awarded. But reality prefers a slower, more awkward pace. Fleming published his findings, but the scientific world didn't exactly throw a parade. Penicillin was difficult to purify, unstable, and hard to produce in any usable quantity. For more than a decade, the discovery sat on the back shelf of scientific awareness. Interesting, promising, but not yet practical. It wasn't until the early 1940s that a team of researchers at the University of Oxford, Howard Florey, Ernst Boris Chain, and Norman Heatley, managed to purify and mass-produce penicillin. Their timing couldn't have been more critical. World War II was raging, and infections were claiming more lives than bullets. With the help of the US government and a massive industrial push, penicillin production ramped up. By the time of the D-Day invasion in 1944, penicillin was being used on a vast scale to treat infected wounds and save countless soldiers' lives. The antibiotic era had begun. Penicillin was nothing short of a miracle. It treated infections that were once lethal. Pneumonia, syphilis, meningitis, strep throat, all became manageable, curable conditions. The mortality rate for bacterial pneumonia alone dropped dramatically. What was once a terrifying diagnosis became just another script from your local pharmacy. But penicillin wasn't alone for long. Scientists, now buzzing with the potential of antimicrobial substances, began searching for more, and they found them. Streptomycin, chloramphenicol, tetracycline. The pharmaceutical shelves filled with new antibiotics, each targeting different types of bacteria in different ways. Soil samples were combed for microbes. Laboratories became tiny battlegrounds in the war against infection. For decades, antibiotics were seen as unstoppable. They were prescribed for everything, from serious infections to minor coughs, and sometimes even for things they couldn't treat, like viral illnesses. It was a golden age of medicine. Children who once might have died from strep throat now bounced back in days. Appendicitis became less frightening. Complicated surgeries became safer. Even childbirth became dramatically less risky, thanks to a reduced threat of postpartum infection. And yet, hidden within this triumph was a warning, because while antibiotics are powerful, bacteria are clever. Very clever. Bacteria multiply rapidly. Some can double their population in as little as 20 minutes, and with every generation there's a chance for mutation. Sometimes these mutations offer no advantage, but occasionally a tiny genetic tweak gives a bacterium resistance to an antibiotic. Maybe it produces an enzyme that breaks down the drug. Maybe it changes the shape of the target the antibiotic usually binds to. Maybe it pumps the drug out of its cell before it can do harm. Now imagine this tiny, newly resistant bacterium is the sole survivor of an antibiotic treatment. All its weaker relatives are dead. It reproduces, it spreads. And suddenly, the next time that antibiotic is used, it doesn't work as well. Or at all. This isn't theoretical, it's already happening. Antibiotic resistance is one of the greatest public health challenges of the 21st century. infections that were once easily treatable are becoming more difficult, and sometimes impossible, to cure. Drug-resistant tuberculosis, gonorrhea, and staph infections are on the rise. Some strains of bacteria are now resistant to multiple antibiotics, earning the ominous title of superbugs. Part of the problem is overuse. Antibiotics are still prescribed when they're not needed, especially for viral infections like the common cold or the flu. In some countries, antibiotics are available over the counter, no prescription required. In agriculture, antibiotics are often given to livestock not just to treat illness, but to promote growth, creating a perfect breeding ground for resistance. Another part of the problem is underdevelopment. While we raced to discover new antibiotics in the mid-20th century, the pipeline has slowed dramatically. Developing a new antibiotic is expensive, time-consuming, and not always profitable. Many pharmaceutical companies have stepped away from antibiotic research, focusing instead on chronic conditions that offer more reliable financial returns. So we find ourselves in a peculiar situation. We've become so good at using antibiotics that we've undermined their effectiveness. We've come to rely on them so deeply that the thought of a world without them feels almost unthinkable, and yet we're inching closer to that reality. But all is not gloom and doom. Scientists are working on novel strategies to combat resistance. Some are developing antibiotics that work in entirely new ways, targeting bacterial mechanisms we haven't exploited before. Others are turning to bacteriophages, viruses that infect and kill bacteria, as a possible alternative. There's also renewed interest in reviving older antibiotics that had fallen out of favor, but might still be effective against resistant strains. On the public health front, education campaigns aim to promote responsible antibiotic use. Hospitals now implement antibiotic stewardship programs, tracking prescriptions and encouraging narrow-spectrum drugs that target specific bacteria, rather than blasting the entire microbial neighborhood. Even ordinary people can make a difference. Finishing prescribed courses of antibiotics, avoiding unnecessary use, and supporting better food systems all play a role. It turns out that using antibiotics wisely is as important as discovering them in the first place. And in all of this, it's important not to lose sight of the extraordinary power antibiotics still hold. They remain one of the few medical interventions that can cure disease outright, not manage, not reduce symptoms, but eliminate the cause. That power is something worth protecting. Antibiotics are also a reminder of the serendipitous nature of science, a forgotten petri dish, a curious glance, a refusal to toss out what looked like a mistake. They show us that discovery isn't always about dramatic breakthroughs. Sometimes it's about being open to the unexpected. They also remind us of the strange balance in biology. We fight bacteria, yes, but we also live with them. Our bodies are home to trillions of bacteria, in our gut, on our skin, even in our lungs. Most are harmless, many are helpful. Antibiotics don't always distinguish. They wipe out the good with the bad, and that too is part of the challenge. How do we fight the harmful bacteria without disrupting the delicate microbial ecosystems we rely on? In recent years, the idea of personalized medicine has begun to emerge. Treatments tailored to your specific microbiome, probiotics designed to restore balance after antibiotic use, targeted therapies that act like guided missiles instead of carpet bombs. The future of antibiotics may not just be about killing bacteria, but about working with them, reshaping relationships rather than declaring war. As you lie there listening, it's worth reflecting on how many lives antibiotics have touched. Perhaps you've taken them yourself. Perhaps they saved someone you love. Their story is deeply personal, woven into family histories, recovery rooms, and quiet nights of worry turned into relief. All because someone noticed a mouldy dish and thought, that's odd. That's science at its best. Not just the clean answers, but the messy questions, the unplanned detours, the discoveries that start with fungi and end with a revolution. The war against bacteria is far from over, but thanks to antibiotics, and to the minds that dare to look closer, we've got more than hope. We've got tools, we've got knowledge, and if we're careful, we just might keep the miracle alive. Picture this. You're standing in a soot-covered alleyway in a city that smells faintly of coal smoke and cabbage stew. The air hums with machinery, The clatter of horseshoes is giving way to the hiss of steam engines. People swarm through the streets in layers of wool and grime, and overhead, a grey sky hangs low, thick with the breath of progress. Welcome to the Industrial Revolution, the moment the world decided to put down its hand tools and pick up a wrench. It started, like many big things do, with something small: thread. In the mid-18th century, textile production was slow and mostly home-based. Skilled workers spun yarn and wove fabric by hand, usually in cottages. It was called the putting out system, a charming name for a very inefficient process. But then came the spinning jenny, the water frame, and the power loom. Suddenly one person could do the work of many, and factories began to rise. The textile industry led the charge, but it didn't stop there. Soon, the gears of industry were grinding into every corner of life. At the heart of the revolution was steam. James Watt's improvements to the steam engine in the 1770s transformed it from a clunky coal guzzler into a powerful and versatile machine. Steam engines were soon pumping water from mines, driving factory machinery, and powering locomotives across the countryside. The world began to move faster, literally. Railways connected cities, ships crossed oceans more efficiently. Time, once measured by sun and season, began ticking to the rhythm of train schedules. Coal was the fuel of this transformation. Mined from deep underground, it powered the furnaces, the engines, the smog. It heated homes and blackened skies. Entire landscapes were reshaped to meet the appetite of industry. Rivers were diverted. Hills were carved into quarries. Towns mushroomed around factories like soot-streaked satellites. And with industry came cities, not the tidy stone towns of earlier centuries, but sprawling, chaotic urban jungles. London, Manchester, Birmingham. Cities swelled as people flocked from rural farms in search of work. By the mid-19th century, more than half of England's population lived in urban areas. It was the first time in history that cities began to outnumber countryside in terms of population. It wouldn't be the last. Life in these industrial cities was a mixed bag. On one hand, there was opportunity. Wages, though low, could be steady. Goods were cheaper and more widely available. Life expectancy began to inch upward, not everywhere, but in the long run. Education slowly expanded. A new middle class began to emerge, buying pocket watches, newspapers, and factory-made furniture. But then there were the shadows. Factory work was grueling, 12 to 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, often in dangerous conditions. Children as young as 5 or 6 were employed to crawl under machines, clean chimneys, or haul coal through narrow mine shafts. Accidents were common. Safety regulations were more of a suggestion than a standard. In many factories, you were expected to bring your own candles, to light your own way, quite literally. And the air. Oh, the air. It wasn't just coal smoke. It was dust from cotton mills, chemical fumes from dye houses, and the ever-present haze of human proximity. Diseases spread quickly in crowded tenements. Cholera outbreaks were common, as sewage often ran in open channels through the streets. In some neighborhoods, clean drinking water was a luxury. Life in the industrial city could be short, brutal, and dirty. Yet despite the hardship, something was happening. A transformation not just of industry, but of society. The Industrial Revolution brought with it a series of profound shifts, not all of them visible in smokestacks and soot. For one, it changed how people thought about time. Clocks became essential. Factory whistles replaced rooster crows. The concept of the workday became standardized. Punctuality, once a personal virtue, became a professional requirement. And leisure, what little of it there was, began to take on new forms. Public parks, music halls, newspapers, football matches. It also changed the structure of labor. The artisan, once respected and autonomous, became a cog in a larger machine. The relationship between worker and product grew more distant. Instead of crafting a chair from start to finish, you might spend your entire shift tightening bolts on a single part. Efficiency increased, but at a cost to identity and pride. Still, not all was bleak. The Industrial Revolution sparked a wave of inventions that genuinely improved lives. The telegraph shrank the world with dots and dashes. the electric light began to replace gas lamps. The sewing machine made clothing more affordable, canned food extended shelf life, sanitation systems slowly improved. Public health measures started to emerge, often in response to disasters, but still progress. It also laid the groundwork for modern democracy in unexpected ways. As workers organized into unions and demanded better conditions, the idea of labor rights gained traction. Governments began to pass laws regulating child labor, limiting working hours and mandating education. The balance of power shifted ever so slightly toward the people, and the idea that every citizen deserved a voice started to take hold. Of course, industrialization didn't happen evenly across the globe. While Britain led the charge, other countries followed at their own pace. Germany, the United States, France, and Japan all industrialized in waves, each adding their own flair to the process. Colonies were often exploited to feed the hungry factories of Europe, supplying raw materials like cotton, rubber, and tea, while buying back finished goods at inflated prices. This global reach added another layer to the revolution: empire and extraction. Industrial nations grew rich on the backs of colonial labor and resources. Railroads were laid not just to connect cities, but to move goods out of colonies more efficiently. Plantations expanded, forests were felled. The Industrial Revolution wasn't just a local event, it became a planetary one. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the second wave of industrialization was underway. This phase brought electricity, mass production, and chemical engineering into the spotlight. Factories became more automated. Assembly lines, most famously at Henry Ford's car plants, redefined productivity. What once took hours could now be done in minutes. Products became cheaper, more standardized, and more accessible to the masses. But mass production also meant mass consumption, and with that came waste. Packaging, pollution, and planned obsolescence began to emerge. The Earth, which had long seemed inexhaustible, started to show signs of strain. In many ways, the Industrial Revolution never really ended. It evolved. It morphed into the digital age, the information age, the automation age. But its fingerprints are still everywhere. In the layout of our cities, the rhythms of our workdays, the systems that deliver food, energy, and clean water. It reshaped not just what we do, but how we think about progress, value, and what it means to live a good life. It's worth noting that the revolution also sparked a flood of data. Statistical analysis, public health surveys, census reports, all of these tools emerged to help make sense of the rapidly changing world. In fact, one of the earliest maps of disease, John Snow's famous cholera map of London, helped identify the connection between contaminated water and illness. It was a foundational moment in the development of epidemiology and public health. Education, too, transformed. As industrial economies needed more skilled workers, governments began investing in public education. Literacy rates soared. Newspapers became more than elite pastimes. They were daily fixtures in many homes. The rise of the printed word, paired with a growing middle class, fostered a new kind of informed citizen. Ideas could travel farther, faster, and with greater impact than ever before. And let's not forget the arts. The Industrial Revolution inspired waves of creative response, from romantic poets lamenting the loss of nature, to realist painters capturing the grit of factory life, to early photographers documenting urban poverty. Even architecture responded, with iron and steel enabling structures once thought impossible. Train stations became cathedrals of movement. Bridges spanned rivers like threads of progress. Still, for all its marvels, the Industrial Revolution remains a study in contrast. It lifted millions from poverty, extended lifespans, and connected the world. But it also deepened inequality, scarred the environment, and introduced an intensity of labor and stress that would become all too familiar in the modern age. And yet it's hard to imagine life without it. That toaster in your kitchen, born from industrial manufacturing, the shoes on your feet, mass-produced in a factory, probably using a machine whose design traces back over a century. The trains that glide silently across countryside landscapes, Their ancestors puffed steam through sooty tunnels, carrying coal and cotton and hopes for a better life. In the end, the Industrial Revolution wasn't just about machines. It was about momentum, about humans learning how to multiply their efforts, stretch their reach, and shape their world in ways previously unimaginable. It was, like all great discoveries, a mix of light and shadow, of invention and exploitation, of comfort and consequence, and it all began with a bit of steam, a spool of thread, and a desire to do things just a little bit faster. Evolution is one of those ideas that can make you feel incredibly small and incredibly connected all at once. It's the quiet backdrop to every breath you take, every blink, every stretch of your fingers. It hums in your DNA, in the shape of your bones, in the way your body fights infection. Evolution is not just something that happened long ago in a swamp or a sea. It is still happening in you, right now. But the journey to understanding it was anything but simple. For much of human history, people explain the diversity of life through myths, stories, and traditions. The natural world was seen as fixed, orderly, and purposeful, each creature made just so. In many cultures, animals were symbolic, divine, or designed to fit into the human world. A giraffe had a long neck because someone had to reach the tall trees. A peacock had bright feathers because beauty pleased the gods. Every creature had a reason, and that reason was usually wrapped in a story. And then along came a curious gentleman with a thick beard and a very slow boat. Charles Darwin was born in England in 1809. He studied medicine, but quickly found that watching surgery in a time before anesthesia was not his cup of tea. He tried theology next, but his true love was nature, beetles, fossils, barnacles. If it crawled or crumbled, Darwin wanted to study it. In 1831, he boarded the HMS Beagle as a naturalist on a voyage that would last nearly 5 years. The ship circled the globe, and Darwin took notes on everything. He observed finches in the Galapagos Islands, each species with slightly different beaks. He studied fossils in South America that resembled modern animals, but were clearly from another age. He filled notebook after notebook with observations, sketches, and ideas. But it wasn't until more than 20 years later, in 1859, that he published on the origin of species. The central idea was both simple and explosive. All species of life evolved over time from common ancestors through a process Darwin called natural selection. The idea was not that humans came from monkeys, a phrase Darwin never used, but that humans and monkeys share a common ancestor if you go back far enough. In fact, all life shares a common ancestor. Every tree, mushroom, moth, dolphin, and daffodil. All branches from the same grand tree of life. Natural selection works like this. Individuals in a population vary in their traits. Some of those traits offer a better chance of surviving and reproducing in a given environment. Over time, those helpful traits become more common, and the population changes. It's not a ladder of progress. It's a branching, tangled, ever-shifting process. Nature tries things out. Some stick. Some vanish. Some make a comeback in surprising ways. The idea rocked the scientific world. It challenged not only biology but philosophy, theology, and the human ego. If we were not specially created as is, but instead shaped by the same forces that molded worms and whales, what did that mean for our place in the universe? Not everyone was thrilled. Darwin's ideas were controversial, particularly among those who saw them as undermining religious belief. But among scientists, the theory of evolution by natural selection gradually gained support, especially as more evidence came to light. Fossils, embryology, comparative anatomy, all started lining up behind Darwin's idea. And then came the genes. In the early 20th century, scientists rediscovered the work of Gregor Mendel, an Austrian monk who had quietly worked out the basic rules of heredity by breeding pea plants. Mendel's work showed that traits are passed down in predictable patterns through discrete units, what we now call genes. At first, it wasn't clear how Mendel's genetics and Darwin's natural selection fit together, but as biology advanced, the pieces started to align. In the 1930s and 40s, scientists developed the modern synthesis, unifying theory that brought together Darwin's ideas with Mendelian genetics. it became clear that natural selection acts on variation produced by genes. Mutations in DNA create new traits. If those traits help an organism survive and reproduce, they spread. Evolution, it turned out, had a molecular engine, and that engine has been running for billions of years. Take your own body, for example. Your inner ear contains tiny bones, the malleus, incus, and stapes that help transmit sound. Those bones evolved from the jawbones of ancient reptiles. Your spine still bears the layout of a fish, with vertebrae stacked like coins. Your limbs follow a pattern shared by bats, whales, cats, and humans. One upper bone, two lower bones, then a bunch of smaller bones leading to fingers or fins. You're full of evolutionary leftovers. Goosebumps, for example, are a relic from a time when our ancestors had more body hair. Puffing it up made them look larger and kept them warmer. The appendix, long thought to be useless, may have had a role in digesting cellulose when our diets were more plant-heavy. Even hiccups may be a leftover reflex from amphibian ancestors who controlled their breathing and swallowing in water. And then there's the DNA, the ultimate evolutionary receipt. Every cell in your body carries a genetic history book written in 4 letters, A, T, C, and G. When scientists compare the genomes of different species, they find striking similarities. Humans share about 98% of their DNA with chimpanzees, but we also share around 60% with fruit flies and even 30% with bananas. That's not a typo. You, dear listener, are about 1/3 banana, genetically speaking. Evolution also explains the strange beauty of the natural world. Why does a peacock have such an impractically large tail? Why does a bird of paradise perform an elaborate dance just to find a mate? Sexual selection, a subset of natural selection, favors traits that improve an organism's chances of reproducing, even if those traits seem ridiculous in other contexts. If a bigger, brighter tail impresses more peahens, then more big-tailed peacocks will leave descendants. Nature, it seems, has a flair for the dramatic. But evolution isn't always slow and stately. It can move quickly under pressure. Bacteria evolve resistance to antibiotics in a matter of months or years. Insects adapt to pesticides. Urban animals develop new behaviors to navigate human landscapes. Evolution is not a dusty relic of the past. It is active, adaptable, and ongoing. Of course, not every evolutionary change is helpful. Some traits stick around simply because they're good enough. Evolution doesn't aim for perfection. It aims for better than the competition. That's why our knees ache, our backs complain, and our sinuses are laid out like a badly designed plumbing system. Evolution tinkers. It adapts old parts for new uses. It doesn't start from scratch. Evolution has also had its share of misuse. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, some people twisted evolutionary ideas to justify racism, eugenics, and social inequality. They claimed that certain groups were more evolved or fit than others, ignoring both science and ethics in favor of ideology. These pseudo-scientific arguments caused real harm and left lasting scars. It's crucial to understand that evolution describes how organisms change over time. It doesn't assign value. There's no moral ladder, no superior endpoint. A bacterium is just as evolved as a human, in the sense that it's perfectly adapted to its environment. Evolution doesn't care about intelligence, kindness, or the ability to compose lullabies. It cares only about survival and reproduction. And yet, evolution can give us a kind of wonder, a sense of connection. You're here because, for billions of years, your ancestors, human and pre-human, managed to survive long enough to pass on their genes. Through droughts, ice ages, volcanic eruptions, and saber-toothed tigers, through migrations and mutations, tiny missteps and lucky leaps, every cell in your body is descended from cells that never died, a continuous line stretching back to the dawn of life. You're a story that started in the ocean, wandered onto land, climbed into trees, and eventually built telescopes to gaze at the stars. You're made of the same elements forged in stars, shaped by time, pressure, chance, and choice. So the next time you swat a mosquito or marvel at a butterfly, or scratch your head wondering why your wisdom teeth are so poorly placed, think of evolution. Think of the long, twisting journey that brought life to this moment. A journey with no final destination, only endless branching, endless becoming. And somewhere along the way, that journey led to you, lying here, relaxing, listening, and perhaps wondering where it all goes next. If you've ever opened a kitchen drawer and found a mysterious container with a snap-on lid, a strange shape, and absolutely no memory of what it was meant to store, congratulations, you've met plastic. Ubiquitous, convenient, and often slightly annoying, plastic is one of the defining materials of the modern world. It's in our phones, our food packaging, our clothes, our cars, and even our tea bags. It's also in our oceans, our soil, and, as recent studies have shown, even inside our bodies. But how did we get here? How did a synthetic material made from petroleum become both a miracle and a menace? The story of plastic begins in the 19th century with a game of billiards. Back then, billiard balls were made from ivory, a material harvested from elephant tusks. As demand for the game grew, conservation was, perhaps surprisingly, one of the motivations behind a search for alternatives. In the 1860s, an American inventor named John Wesley Hyatt responded to a competition offering $10,000 for a substitute for ivory. He experimented with cellulose, a natural polymer found in plant cell walls, and developed a material called celluloid. Celluloid was the first semi-synthetic plastic. It was moldable, durable, and could be used to make everything from combs to camera film. It also had the unfortunate habit of being flammable, which is never ideal for household goods. Still, it marked a turning point. The realization that we could create new materials not found in nature by manipulating organic chemistry. Then, in 1907, a Belgian chemist named Leo Baekeland invented Bakelite, the first fully synthetic plastic. Unlike celluloid, Bakelite wasn't made from plant matter. It was created from phenol and formaldehyde cooked under pressure. It was heat-resistant, non-conductive, and could be molded into almost any shape. It quickly found use in the electrical insulators, telephone casings, and radios. It was marketed as the material of 1,000 uses. And truly, plastic would live up to that promise. Over the 20th century, scientists developed dozens of new plastic polymers, each with its own properties and perks. Polyethylene, used in plastic bags and bottles. Polypropylene, found in food containers and car bumpers. Polystyrene, the lightweight stuff in takeout boxes and packing peanuts. Polyvinyl chloride, or PVC, used in plumbing pipes and credit cards. And of course, the now infamous polyethylene terephthalate, better known as PET, used for drink bottles and synthetic fibers. Plastics were cheap to make, lightweight, waterproof, and resistant to corrosion. They could be molded into nearly any form. They could be clear or colourful, soft or rigid, flexible or firm. They seemed like a modern miracle, and in many ways they were. During World War II, plastic production surged. Nylon, originally developed as a silk substitute for stockings, became essential for parachutes, ropes, and tents. Plexiglass was used in aircraft canopies. Lightweight plastic components replaced heavier metal parts. After the war, the technology spilled over into civilian life. Kitchens filled with Tupperware. Children played with plastic toys. Food was wrapped in plastic film. Cars, once built from steel and chrome, incorporated plastic dashboards and trim. The plastic age had arrived, and it wasn't going anywhere. For a time, plastic was celebrated as the great democratizer of materials. It made products affordable and accessible. It allowed for innovations in medicine, disposable syringes, sterile packaging, IV bags. It improved food safety and preservation. It even helped advance aerospace and electronics. Computers, cell phones, spacecraft all owe a great deal to the versatility of plastic. But as with many revolutionary materials, there was a catch. Plastic doesn't go away. That's part of its charm and its curse. While it resists rot, rust, and decay, it also resists, well, everything. A plastic bottle can take hundreds of years to decompose. A straw tossed out during a lunch break might outlast your great-grandchildren. And because plastic is so light and cheap, we don't think twice about discarding it. We use billions of plastic bags each year, most for just a few minutes. Disposable cutlery, single-use packaging, shrink wrap, all designed for convenience and all destined for landfills, waterways or incinerators. The oceans have taken a particular hit. Every year, millions of tons of plastic waste enter marine environments. Some of it floats, forming vast patches of debris like the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Some sinks, breaking down into smaller and smaller particles, microplastics, that are now found in fish, sea salt, and even bottled water. These tiny fragments can be ingested by marine life, working their way up the food chain, possibly all the way back to us. It turns out that the material of 1,000 uses also comes with 1,000 unintended consequences. There's also the issue of recycling, or rather, the illusion of it. While many products carry the familiar recycling symbol, the reality is that only a small fraction of plastic is actually recycled. The rest is burned, landfilled, or shipped across the world, often to countries that lack the infrastructure to manage the waste. Contamination, mixed polymers, and low economic incentives make true recycling difficult. Unlike glass or aluminum, plastic degrades in quality each time it's recycled, limiting its reusability. And then there's the environmental cost of production. Most plastics are made from fossil fuels, either oil or natural gas. The process of extracting, transporting, and refining these resources contributes to greenhouse gas emissions, so even before a plastic bottle is used, it has already left a carbon footprint. Despite these issues, plastic remains deeply embedded in modern life. Many of its applications are genuinely hard to replace. In healthcare, plastics offer sterility and flexibility that few materials can match. In aviation and transport, their lightness reduces fuel consumption. In electronics, they insulate and protect delicate circuits. The challenge, then, is not simply to eliminate plastic, but to rethink our relationship with it, to distinguish between necessary use and needless waste, to design for durability, reuse, and end-of-life management. Innovators around the world are working on alternatives. Bioplastics made from cornstarch or sugarcane offer a renewable source, though they still have limitations in terms of strength and decomposition. Some startups are experimenting with mushroom-based packaging or seaweed-based films. Others are developing enzymes and microbes that can break down plastic more efficiently. There's even research into plastic made from captured carbon dioxide, turning a problem into a product. Legislation is slowly catching up. Cities and countries are banning single-use plastics, taxing plastic bags, and mandating extended producer responsibility. Corporations are pledging to reduce plastic packaging, use more recycled content, and shift towards circular economy models. At the same time, individuals are making choices, carrying reusable bags, using metal straws, refilling water bottles, shopping in bulk. These choices may seem small, but they send signals, they shape demand, they spark conversations, they create momentum, and perhaps most importantly, they remind us that convenience and care don't have to be mutually exclusive. Plastic, for all its flaws, is not evil. It's a tool, a very effective, often misused tool. It allowed us to reach the moon, perform complex surgeries, and safely package vaccines. It also wrapped our bananas in unnecessary film and made party balloons that end up strangling sea turtles. It gave us both MRI machines and microbeads in toothpaste. Like so many human inventions, it reflects us, our ingenuity, our appetite for ease, our tendency to solve one problem by creating another. So, as you drift deeper into rest, consider the paradox of plastic, a material born from chemistry and shaped by culture, a substance that changed the world and now challenges us to change again. In the light, plastic helped build modernity. In the shadow, it asks us to build wisely, to invent not only with ambition, but with foresight, to make not only what we can, but what we should, and perhaps to check that kitchen drawer, because if nothing else, plastic loves to hide, and you might just find the lid that's been missing for years. Once upon a time, if you wanted to send a message, you had to put it on paper, seal it with wax, give it to a courier on horseback, and then wait. Days, weeks, maybe longer, hoping it arrived without being intercepted, eaten, or dropped in a puddle. Fast forward to today, and you can send a message from your sofa to someone across the globe in the time it takes to sneeze. You don't even have to spell things correctly anymore. The digital revolution has made communication instant, information limitless, and the phrase BRB, grabbing snacks, a valid part of international discourse. At the heart of all this is a deceptively simple idea: binary, ones and zeros. That's it. Everything from cat videos to heart monitor data, symphonies to spreadsheets, is just a long string of ones and zeros, manipulated by machines that operate at nearly the speed of light. It's elegant, efficient, and a little bit magical. A language understood not by humans, but by circuits, silicon, and logic gates. The digital revolution didn't start all at once. It was a slow build, like a symphony of blinking lights. The earliest computers were more mechanical than magical. Charles Babbage, a 19th century British mathematician, designed the first concept for a programmable machine, the analytical engine. It had gears, cranks, and a remarkable visionary named Ada Lovelace, who wrote what is widely considered the first computer program. This was in the 1840s, long before electricity was standard, and well before Wi-Fi started demanding updates at inconvenient times. But it wasn't until the mid-20th century that computing truly took off. During World War II, machines like the British Colossus and the American ENIAC were built to break codes and calculate ballistic trajectories. They were enormous, room-sized monsters with vacuum tubes and wires snaking like spaghetti. They didn't hum, they clattered, and they got hot enough to boil water, which, while impressive, wasn't great for long-term functionality. Then came the transistor. Invented in 1947 by John Bardeen, Walter Brattain, and William Shockley at Bell Labs, the transistor replaced bulky vacuum tubes with something smaller, faster, and far more reliable. It was a little switch that could turn electrical signals on and off, and it changed everything. Suddenly, computers didn't have to take up entire rooms. They could shrink, speed up, and eventually fit into your pocket. Integrated circuits followed. Chips that packed thousands, then millions of transistors onto a sliver of silicon. Moore's law, coined by Intel co-founder Gordon Moore, predicted that the number of transistors on a chip would double roughly every 2 years. That prediction held true for decades, leading to an exponential increase in computing power and a steady decline in size and cost. By the 1970s and 80s, personal computers were beginning to appear. Names like Apple, IBM, and Commodore entered living rooms and offices. The first models were clunky by today's standards, but they opened a door. Word processing, spreadsheets, basic games. It was the start of a digital lifestyle. Then came the internet. The internet was born not as a commercial venture, but as a military and academic experiment. ARPANET, created in the late 1960s by the United States Department of Defense, allowed researchers to share information across different computers. It used something called packet switching, breaking data into chunks, sending it through a network, and reassembling it at the other end. It was efficient, resilient, and far more exciting than it probably sounds. In the 1990s, the internet went public. The World Wide Web, invented by Tim Berners-Lee, introduced a way to organize and access information using websites and hyperlinks. Browsers like Netscape and Internet Explorer brought the web to the masses. Suddenly, you didn't need to be a programmer to go online. You just needed a dial-up modem and a healthy tolerance for screeching noises and long loading times. And what did people do with this new power? They built websites about their pets. They chatted in forums about alien abductions. They filled their MySpace pages with glitter graphics and embedded music that played automatically and, let's be honest, a little too loudly. It was chaotic, it was beautiful, and it was just the beginning. The 21st century saw the rise of smartphones, tiny glowing rectangles that combined phone, camera, calculator, compass, map, and infinite distraction into a single device. Apps transformed industries. Social media platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram became digital town squares, where everyone could share their thoughts, their lunch, or their latest dance routine. Search engines gave us answers in milliseconds. GPS guided us through unfamiliar streets. Streaming services brought movies to our homes on demand. Online shopping let us buy pajamas while wearing pajamas. The digital world was no longer separate. It was woven into daily life. But as with all great leaps, the digital revolution came with shadows. One of the most profound changes was in how we relate to information. We now have more access to knowledge than any generation in history. Yet we also face a tidal wave of misinformation, conspiracy theories, and digital echo chambers. The same platforms that connect us can also divide us, reinforcing biases and making it harder to tell fact from fiction. Privacy has become a ghost. We trade it for convenience without always realizing it. Our searches, locations, preferences, even our sleep patterns are tracked, analyzed, and sometimes sold. The digital footprint we leave behind is vast, permanent, and only partially under our control. There's also the attention economy, the business of capturing and holding your focus. Apps and websites are designed to be sticky, to keep you scrolling, swiping, liking. Notifications buzz and blink, drawing us back in. And while some of it is delightful, much of it is draining. Mental health professionals are increasingly studying the effects of constant connectivity. Anxiety, depression, sleep disruption. We're plugged in, but not always recharged. And then there's the issue of access. While many of us enjoy high-speed internet and sleek devices, billions of people around the world remain offline or underconnected. The digital divide reflects and reinforces existing inequalities. Education, opportunity, healthcare, all increasingly depend on connectivity. Closing that gap is one of the defining challenges of our time. Yet for all its complexities, the digital world offers breathtaking potential. It enables remote learning, telemedicine, global collaboration. It powers artificial intelligence that can diagnose diseases, translate languages, compose music. It allows artists to share their work, activists to organize, scientists to model climate change. It helps families stay connected across continents. It brings strangers together in moments of shared joy or quiet empathy. And it continues to evolve. Quantum computing, still in its early stages, promises to revolutionize what computers can do, solving problems far beyond the reach of classical machines. Blockchain technology offers new ways to store data, transfer value, and verify authenticity. The so-called metaverse, whatever shape it eventually takes, points toward even more immersive digital experiences. But amid all this rapid change, one question lingers. How do we make the digital world humane? How do we design technology that supports well-being, fosters trust, respects privacy, and strengthens community? How do we teach digital literacy, not just how to use devices, but how to navigate information, manage attention, and engage with empathy? These are not technical questions, they're ethical ones, and they require reflection, collaboration, and yes, a little wisdom. It's worth remembering that behind every screen is a person, behind every server, a story. The internet is not a machine, it's a mirror. It reflects our hopes, our flaws, our brilliance, and our confusion. It's both a tool and a stage, and what we do with it is entirely up to us. So as you drift deeper into calm, perhaps with a phone charging nearby or a tablet resting on the nightstand, take a moment to marvel at the strangeness of it all. That you can carry an entire library in your pocket. That you can learn a new skill at midnight from someone halfway around the world. That you can send a message to someone you love with a single tap and receive one back seconds later. From ones and zeros came a world. Not perfect, not finished, but undeniably connected. And in that connection, there's a quiet kind of magic. For most of human history, the stars were a mystery. They twinkled overhead, unmoving and unknowable, stitched into myths and calendars, but forever out of reach. The night sky was something to admire, perhaps fear, maybe worship, but not touch. Then, in the blink of a cosmic eye, everything changed. The human race built rockets, launched satellites, walked on the moon, and began exploring the vast and silent ocean of space, and it all began with a beep. In 1957, the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, a beach ball-sized satellite that orbited Earth and transmitted a simple, rhythmic signal, a steady series of beeps picked up by radios around the world. It didn't do much, but it did enough. It proved that humans could put something into space and keep it there. For the first time, we had reached beyond our atmosphere. The space age had officially begun. The implications were immediate and enormous. Sputnik wasn't just a scientific achievement, it was a geopolitical earthquake. In the midst of the Cold War, space became the new frontier for national pride, military advantage, and technological supremacy. The United States quickly responded by creating NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and pouring resources into catching up. The early years of space exploration were marked by drama, danger, and a fair amount of explosive trial and error. Rockets exploded on the launch pad. Prototypes failed in mid-air. But the progress was astonishingly fast. Just 4 years after Sputnik in 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth. He spent 108 minutes in space and returned a hero, famously declaring, "I see Earth. It is beautiful." Not to be outdone, the United States set its sights on the moon. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy announced an audacious goal: to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade was out. At the time, it seemed nearly impossible. Computers were slower than pocket calculators, spacesuits were still being designed, but with a staggering collective effort, thousands of engineers, scientists, technicians, and pilots, the goal was achieved. On July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped off the ladder of the lunar module and made his famous declaration: "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." He and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon's dusty surface, set up experiments, planted a flag, and then, remarkably, came back home. The Apollo missions captured the imagination of the world. For a brief, shimmering moment, the moon was a place we had actually been, not just a silver coin in the sky. People stayed up late to watch grainy black and white broadcasts. School children drew pictures of astronauts. The future felt thrilling and limitless. But space exploration didn't stop with the moon. While no humans have returned since 1972, machines have gone much farther. Space probes have visited every planet in our solar system. Voyager 1, launched in 1977, is now traveling through interstellar space, carrying a golden record with sounds and images from Earth, including greetings in 55 languages and, charmingly, a recording of a kiss. Satellites now orbit Earth in great numbers, quietly enabling GPS, weather forecasts, television, and global communication. The Hubble Space Telescope, launched in 1990, has taken some of the most breathtaking images ever captured: colourful nebulae, swirling galaxies, and the faint glow of stars born billions of years ago. Then there's the International Space Station, a collaborative marvel floating about 250 miles above Earth. Since the year 2000, it has been continuously inhabited by rotating crews of astronauts from multiple nations. They live, work, and conduct experiments in microgravity, offering insights into everything from muscle atrophy to crystal growth. It is, quite literally, a house in the sky, one built by cooperation, not competition. In recent years, the space landscape has shifted again, this time driven by the private sector. Companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, and Rocket Lab have entered the scene, developing reusable rockets and lowering the cost of launches. In 2020, SpaceX became the first private company to send astronauts to the International Space Station. Space travel, once the exclusive domain of governments, is becoming a bit more commercial, a bit more crowded, and perhaps someday a bit more routine. But space is not just a playground for billionaires or a backdrop for sci-fi dreams. It has real, practical benefits. Earth observation satellites help us monitor climate change, track deforestation, and respond to natural disasters. GPS satellites keep planes, ships, and delivery vans on course. Telecommunication satellites beam signals across continents. Even the materials developed for space missions, from heat-resistant ceramics to water filtration systems, often find their way into everyday life. And then there's the inspiration. Few things capture the imagination like space. It invites big questions. Where did we come from? Are we alone? How big is the universe? What's on the other side of that star? Exploring space doesn't always provide answers, but it does deepen the questions, and sometimes it gives us perspective. The pale blue dot photo taken by Voyager 1 from over 3 billion miles away shows Earth as a tiny speck suspended in a sunbeam. Carl Sagan, reflecting on the image, reminded us that every human being who ever was lived out their lives on that dot. It's a humbling view, a cosmic reminder that we're small, fragile, and incredibly lucky. Of course, space exploration isn't without challenges. It's expensive, complex, and risky. Astronauts face radiation, isolation, and the strange effects of microgravity, like fluid shifting toward the head, causing stuffy sinuses and puffy faces. Re-entry into Earth's atmosphere is perilous. Launch failures still happen. And space debris, the ever-growing cloud of defunct satellites and rocket parts, poses a real threat to future missions. There are also ethical questions. If we find life on another planet, even microbial, what responsibilities do we have? Should we terraform other worlds or leave them untouched? Who gets to decide what flags are planted, what laws apply, or what names go on the map? And let's not forget the environmental cost. Rockets burn fuel. Launch pads require infrastructure. The growing number of launches adds to atmospheric pollution and space traffic. As with all things, balance is key. The dream of reaching the stars must be weighed with care for the planet we launch from. Still, space exploration continues to evolve. NASA's Artemis program aims to return humans to the moon, this time to stay. The goal is not just flags and footprints, but a sustainable presence, lunar habitats, long-term missions, maybe even mining resources from the moon's surface. The moon could become a stepping stone to Mars and beyond. Mars, of course, is the next great prize. Several robotic missions have already visited, including the rover Perseverance, which is currently exploring the Martian surface, collecting samples and searching for signs of ancient life. NASA, SpaceX, and other agencies dream of sending humans there in the coming decades. It's a massive undertaking. Months of travel, harsh conditions, and no quick way home. But it could mark the beginning of a new chapter in the human story. And beyond Mars, that's where imagination takes over. Asteroid mining, space elevators, habitats orbiting Earth, interstellar probes. Ideas that once belonged to science fiction are now serious topics of discussion. We may not have warp drives or transporters just yet, but the boundaries of the possible are always shifting. Space has always been about more than exploration. It's about perspective. From orbit, national borders vanish. The planet looks whole, alive, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Astronauts often report a sense of awe, a shift in consciousness known as the overview effect. Seeing Earth from above changes how they think about it. They see one world, one people, one home. And that perhaps is the greatest gift of space exploration. Not just the technology or the adventure, but the reminder of our shared existence. That we are, as Sagan put it, star stuff contemplating the stars. That we're both fragile and resilient, both explorers and caretakers. So the next time you look up at the night sky, remember this. We are part of that story now. We've sent our machines to the planets. We've touched the moon. We've built homes in orbit and sent signals into the dark. We're no longer just watching the stars. We're beginning to walk among them. If you've ever whispered, "Please don't let my toaster be smarter than me," then congratulations. You've already started thinking about artificial intelligence. In just a few short decades, AI has gone from science fiction curiosity to everyday companion. It recommends what you watch, routes your GPS, screens your email, suggests songs, and may even help diagnose disease. It does all this quietly, invisibly, often without asking for credit. But what exactly is it doing, and where is it taking us? Artificial intelligence, at its core, is about teaching machines to do things that normally require human intelligence. That could mean recognizing speech, translating languages, making decisions, or even playing chess better than any grandmaster. And while the term AI sounds futuristic and dramatic, conjuring images of glowing-eyed robots, Most of the AI we encounter daily is subtle, specialized, and surprisingly well behaved. The roots of AI go back further than you might think. Philosophers have been pondering the nature of thought and consciousness for thousands of years. But the technical story begins in the 20th century with the rise of computers. In 1950, Alan Turing, British mathematician, codebreaker, and general genius, posed a famous question: can machines think? He suggested a test, now known as the Turing test, to determine whether a machine's responses could be indistinguishable from humans. If you couldn't tell the difference, did it matter if it was thinking or not? Early AI programs in the 1950s and 60s were simple but promising. Researchers built systems that could play games, solve equations, or mimic conversation in very narrow ways. But progress was slow. Computers were expensive, memory was limited, and the enthusiasm often outpaced reality. After a few decades of unmet expectations, AI entered a quiet period known as the AI winter. Funding dried up, and for a while, the idea of intelligent machines slipped into the shadows. But shadows don't last forever. As computing power increased, and as new techniques emerged, especially in the form of machine learning, AI began to bloom again. Machine learning is where things get interesting. Instead of programming a computer with fixed rules, you feed it data and let it figure out the patterns. Imagine teaching a machine to recognize cats. Instead of writing out instructions like, look for whiskers, ears, and feline smugness, you just show it thousands of pictures labeled cat or not cat. Over time, the algorithm learns to associate features with the correct label. It may not know why a cat is a cat, but it knows enough to say that, yep, definitely a cat. A more advanced subset of machine learning is deep learning, which uses neural networks, loosely inspired by the structure of the human brain. These networks have multiple layers of interconnected nodes, or neurons, that process data in increasingly abstract ways. The deeper the network, the more nuanced its understanding. It's how voice assistants understand your commands, how translation tools work, and how AI can generate art, compose music, or even write bedtime stories about robot dinosaurs who just want to be loved. This technology powers everything from facial recognition to fraud detection. It can predict which customers are likely to cancel a subscription, which tumors might be malignant, or which text you're about to type next. Sometimes it's spooky. Sometimes it's wildly helpful. Sometimes it gets stuck translating "I'm feeling lucky" into 17 different synonyms for mildly optimistic. One of the most visible achievements of AI came in the form of games. In 1997, IBM's Deep Blue defeated world chess champion Garry Kasparov, a milestone that shocked many. But that was just the beginning. In 2016, Google DeepMind's AlphaGo beat the world champion of Go, a game vastly more complex than chess, full of intuition and fluid strategy. The machine didn't just play well, it made moves that no human would have considered. It was a glimpse into how AI doesn't just replicate human thought, it can go somewhere stranger. But it's not all fun and board games. AI is also being used in healthcare, where it helps identify diseases in medical images, predict patient outcomes, and suggest treatment options. In finance, it detects suspicious transactions and helps manage investment portfolios. In agriculture, it optimizes crop yields and monitors soil health. In disaster response, it analyzes satellite data to assess damage and direct aid. It is also used to recommend movies, filter spam, power chatbots, generate deepfakes, score resumes, and, perhaps most suspiciously, determine which ads to show you based on the cookies you didn't realize you accepted. With all this usefulness, you might think AI is a universally welcomed helper. But like any powerful tool, it comes with challenges, some technical, some ethical, and some delightfully bizarre. Let's start with bias. AI systems learn from data, and data reflects the world, including its inequalities and prejudices. If a hiring algorithm is trained on past employment data that favors certain demographics, it may unintentionally replicate that bias. If facial recognition software is trained mostly on light-skinned faces, it may struggle with accuracy for people with darker skin. AI doesn't have an agenda, but it inherits ours, and that means we must be careful about how we build and use it. Then there's transparency. Many AI systems, especially deep learning models, are black boxes, meaning even their creators don't always fully understand how they reach a decision. This is a problem in areas like criminal justice or finance, where decisions about bail, credit, or sentencing may be influenced by algorithms that can't explain themselves. Would you trust a machine that says, "no loan for you," without telling you why? Privacy is another big concern. AI often relies on vast amounts of personal data to function. Your location, your search history, your shopping habits, all fed into algorithms to make predictions about you. Sometimes it's convenient, sometimes it's unsettling, and sometimes it makes you wonder if your phone really is listening when you casually mention an obscure brand of cat food and see it advertised an hour later. And then there's automation. As machines become better at doing tasks once reserved for humans, driving cars, answering phones, analyzing data, there's real concern about job displacement. Some roles may disappear, others may transform. New jobs will emerge, but they may require different skills. The challenge isn't just technological, it's societal. How do we prepare for a world where machines handle more of the work? That brings us to a deeper philosophical question. What happens when machines start doing things we associate with intelligence, creativity, even emotion? AI can now compose music, write poetry, generate realistic human faces, and engage in surprisingly coherent conversations. Some people find this delightful, others find it unsettling. Can a machine really create if it doesn't understand beauty? Can it write a love poem if it doesn't feel love? Does it matter if we're moved by it anyway? This line between simulation and understanding is blurry. AI doesn't think the way humans do. It doesn't feel joy, fear, boredom, or ambition. It doesn't get nervous on a first date or stay up late thinking about embarrassing things it said 10 years ago. But it can mimic those things with increasing fluency, raising questions about what it means to be intelligent or even conscious. Most AI researchers agree that we're still far from general artificial intelligence, the kind that thinks, reasons, and learns across multiple domains like a human. Today's AI is narrow and task-specific. It's brilliant at focused problems but lacks common sense. It can write you a recipe for invisible pancakes, but won't realize that's probably a bad breakfast plan. Still, progress is accelerating, and some experts worry about what happens if AI becomes too powerful, too quickly. Not because it will turn evil, but because it may be misused, misunderstood, or mishandled. That's why many scientists and ethicists are calling for thoughtful regulation, transparency, and safety protocols, not to stifle innovation, but to guide it responsibly. At the same time, there's enormous promise. Imagine AI systems that help scientists discover new medicines, optimize energy use, or decode the complexities of climate change. Imagine language models that translate obscure dialects, making knowledge more accessible. Imagine tools that help people with disabilities navigate the world more easily. AI doesn't have to be about replacing humans. It can be about augmenting us, enhancing creativity, amplifying insight, expanding what's possible. Of course, we'll need to ask tough questions along the way. Who owns the content created by AI? Who's responsible when an algorithm makes a harmful mistake? Should AI have rights? Should it have a sense of humor? And can we teach it not to autocorrect our names into fruit? These are questions that blend technology with law, philosophy, sociology, and art. They don't have simple answers, but they're important because AI is no longer just an experiment in a lab. It's in our homes, our schools, our cities, shaping how we live, work, and think. And in many ways, it's just getting started. So as you lie there, perhaps with a digital assistant humming softly in the background, or a sleep playlist selected by an algorithm, take a moment to appreciate the strangeness of it all, that machines can now mimic thought, that lines of code can create music, that a string of ones and zeros can compose bedtime stories, guide airplanes, and recommend suspiciously accurate birthday gifts. Artificial intelligence is not magic, but it might be the next best thing, And like all powerful tools, it's up to us to use it with care, curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, a dash of wisdom. Picture the Earth as a giant spaceship, a self-sustaining orb spinning through the void, carrying oceans, forests, cities, and just the right amount of breathable air. It's a miraculous balance, and like any good spaceship, it needs careful maintenance. Enter climate science, the branch of science that tries to understand how Earth systems work, how they've changed over time, and how human activity is nudging the thermostat in ways we're only beginning to fully grasp. At its heart, climate science is about patterns. It looks at temperature, rainfall, ocean currents, ice sheets, carbon levels, and more over long periods of time. It's not about whether you should bring an umbrella tomorrow, as that's weather. Climate is the average of weather over years, decades, and centuries. It's the big picture, the slow story unfolding behind the daily forecast. And that story in recent years has become increasingly urgent. Let's start with some basics. The Earth is naturally wrapped in a blanket of gases called the atmosphere. Some of these gases, like nitrogen and oxygen, are fairly neutral. But others, like carbon dioxide, methane, and water vapor, trap heat from the sun. This is known as the greenhouse effect. It's essential for life as we know it. Without it, Earth would be a frozen ball of ice with average temperatures well below freezing. Not ideal for picnics or penguins. The trouble begins when the blanket gets too thick. Since the late 1800s, when the Industrial Revolution really kicked into gear, humans have been adding more and more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Burning fossil fuels, coal, oil, and natural gas releases carbon dioxide. Agriculture releases methane. Deforestation reduces the number of trees that can absorb carbon. The result is a steady increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide, from about 280 parts per million in pre-industrial times to over 420 parts per million today. That may not sound like much, but in climate terms it's enormous. It's like adding just a few extra quilts to your bed and suddenly waking up drenched in sweat. The Earth is warming. On average, global temperatures have risen by more than 1 degree Celsius since the late 19th century. That might seem modest, but it's already enough to melt glaciers, raise sea levels, and shift weather patterns. The evidence for this change is overwhelming. Scientists have collected ice cores from Antarctica and Greenland that trap tiny bubbles of ancient air. These show a clear correlation between carbon dioxide levels and global temperature over hundreds of thousands of years. Satellite data confirms that the Earth is absorbing more heat. Ocean temperatures are rising. Spring is arriving earlier. Coral reefs are bleaching. Wildfires are growing in frequency and intensity. The signals are not subtle. But climate science isn't just about pointing to a thermometer and saying, well, that's not good. It's about understanding how all the pieces connect. The Earth is an intricate web of systems. Oceans, atmosphere, ice, soil, forests, all interacting in complex ways. Change one thing and everything else shifts a little, or a lot. Take the polar ice caps. As Arctic sea ice melts, it reduces the Earth's albedo, a measure of how much sunlight is reflected back into space. Ice is bright and reflective. Water is dark and absorbs heat. So less ice means more heat absorbed, which means more melting, which means, well, you get the idea. It's a feedback loop, and not the good kind that tells you your hair looks nice today. Or consider permafrost, frozen soil found in the Arctic that contains large amounts of organic matter. As it thaws, microbes break down that material and release carbon dioxide and methane into the atmosphere. More greenhouse gases, more warming, more thawing. Another feedback loop, and this one smells faintly of ancient moss and existential dread. Then there's the oceans. They absorb about 90% of the excess heat from global warming, as well as about a quarter of the carbon dioxide. This has helped buffer the planet from even more dramatic changes, but it's not without consequences. Warmer oceans fuel stronger storms, disrupt marine ecosystems, and cause coral bleaching. More carbon dioxide in the water makes it more acidic, which affects shellfish, plankton, and the entire marine food chain. If the oceans are the lungs of the planet, they're starting to wheeze. Climate change also disrupts the water cycle. Warmer air holds more moisture, which means when it rains, it pours. At the same time, some areas become drier, leading to droughts. Farmers struggle, crops fail. Entire regions can shift from fertile to fragile in a few seasons. Meanwhile, rising sea levels, fueled by melting ice sheets and thermal expansion of seawater, threaten coastal cities, wetlands, and freshwater supplies. And yet, for all the sobering facts, climate science is not just about doom and gloom. It's also about resilience, solutions, and hope, grounded in evidence, not wishful thinking. First, it's important to recognize that not all change is irreversible. While some climate impacts are locked in, others can be slowed or even reversed if action is taken. That means reducing emissions, yes, but also adapting to the changes already underway. Building smarter infrastructure, restoring ecosystems, improving disaster response. These are all part of the climate toolkit. Renewable energy is a big part of the picture. Solar and wind power have become dramatically cheaper over the past decade. Batteries are improving. Electric vehicles are becoming mainstream. In many places, renewables are now the most cost-effective source of electricity, a win for both the planet and your power bill. There's also carbon capture, technologies designed to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere or prevent it from entering in the first place. Some methods involve capturing emissions at the source, like a power plant. Others aim to pull carbon directly from the air, either through machines or by planting more trees and restoring wetlands. The challenge is scaling these solutions quickly and affordably. And let's not forget the role of policy. Governments can set emissions targets, regulate pollutants, invest in clean energy, and support vulnerable communities. International agreements, like the Paris Agreement, aim to coordinate global action and keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius, ideally below 1.5. It's a tall order, but not impossible. On an individual level, there are choices too. How we travel, what we eat, how we heat and cool our homes, it all adds up. No one person can fix the climate crisis, but millions of people making thoughtful choices can shift markets, influence policy, and build momentum. Small actions ripple outward. Education plays a vital role. The more people understand the science, the more likely they are to support meaningful change. Climate communication has come a long way, from dry charts to compelling stories, from abstract models to lived experience. Scientists, activists, artists, and educators are finding new ways to engage the public, to turn numbers into narratives. And then there's innovation. Every year, new ideas emerge, from meat grown in labs to algae that eat carbon, from skyscrapers covered in plants to heat-reflective paint that cools entire neighborhoods. Cities are planting trees, creating bike lanes, and reimagining urban spaces. Farmers are experimenting with regenerative practices that restore soil health and store carbon. Engineers are designing buildings that use less energy and generate their own power. The challenge is enormous, but so is our capacity to meet it. It helps to zoom out just for a moment. Earth has been through ice ages, meteor strikes, massive volcanic eruptions. Life has endured, changed, yes, sometimes dramatically, but endured. What makes this moment different is the speed of change and the fact that one species, ours, is driving it. That means we also have the power to shape what happens next. Climate science gives us the tools to understand the changes unfolding around us. It doesn't sugarcoat the risks, but it also doesn't shut the door on possibility. It says, here's what's happening, here's why, and here's what we can do about it. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that we are not separate from nature. We are not passengers on spaceship Earth. We are the crew. We breathe its air, drink its water, grow food in its soil. Our well-being is tied to its health. When we protect the planet, we are protecting ourselves. So as you relax and let your thoughts drift gently, maybe picture the Earth not as something fragile, but as something alive, breathing, dynamic, strong, but in need of care, like a garden or a friendship, or a very large pet that occasionally floods the basement. Climate science is not about predicting doom. It's about charting a course, about seeing clearly, choosing wisely, and remembering that even small changes, multiplied by millions, can alter the future. In the light of science, we find knowledge. In its shadow, we find responsibility, and in both, we find the chance to do better, for ourselves, for each other, and for the only home we've ever known. Of all the things humans have learned to study, measure, and manipulate, perhaps none are quite as stubbornly mysterious as the human brain. It's about 3 pounds of jelly-like tissue housed in your skull, quietly running your entire life. It tells your heart to beat, your lungs to breathe, your fingers to wiggle. It makes you laugh at jokes, cry at sad movies, remember that song from 15 years ago, and forget where you put your keys 2 minutes ago. It's brilliant, baffling, and still, in many ways, unexplored territory. We often talk about the brain as if it were a computer, and in some ways that's not a terrible metaphor. It processes information, stores data, and sends commands. But it's not just hardware and code. It's emotions, memories, creativity, fear, love, and the weird dreams where you show up to school wearing a frog costume and nobody thinks it's strange. It's not just a thinking machine. It's a feeling, remembering, dreaming, problem-solving, ever-changing biological marvel. The study of the brain, neuroscience, is one of the most exciting and rapidly evolving areas of science. And it's been a long time coming. For centuries, people had no idea what the brain actually did. In ancient Egypt, the brain was scooped out during mummification and discarded, while the heart was carefully preserved, because the heart, they believed, was the seat of thought and emotion. Fast forward a few thousand years, and we've come a long way. We now know the brain is made up of roughly 86 billion neurons, specialized cells that communicate with each other using tiny electrical signals and chemical messengers. Each neuron can connect to thousands of others, creating a dense dynamic network of activity. These connections form circuits, and those circuits form everything you've ever experienced. Every joy, every fear, every idea, every odd crush you had in middle school. Neuroscience has mapped many of the brain's basic regions and their general roles. The cerebral cortex, the outer layer, is where a lot of the action happens: thinking, planning, language, and sensory processing. The frontal lobes are your executive team, decision-making, attention, problem-solving. The temporal lobes help with hearing and memory. The occipital lobe handles vision. The parietal lobes deal with spatial awareness and touch. And buried deeper are structures like the hippocampus, essential for forming new memories, and the amygdala, the emotional alarm bell, especially fond of fear. But the brain doesn't work in isolation. It's always in conversation with the rest of your body. It sends signals down the spinal cord and out through the peripheral nervous system, controlling muscles, regulating organs, adjusting hormone levels, and even triggering goosebumps when you hear that one song that gets you every time. What's especially fascinating is how adaptable the brain is. This quality is called neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself by forming new connections. It's how you learn new skills, adapt to changes, and recover from injury. If you lose a sense like sight or hearing, other parts of the brain can step up. If you practice something repeatedly, those neural circuits get stronger, a biological version of practice makes perfect. And it works both ways. Neglect a skill, and the brain slowly reallocates those resources elsewhere. It's like your internal management team constantly reassigning staff based on demand. No one's doing algebra anymore? Great. Those neurons can help with this new obsession with sourdough baking. Memory is another brain superpower. It's not a filing cabinet where each moment is stored in a neat little folder. It's more like a messy, dynamic scrapbook, constantly edited, rewritten, and sometimes smudged with jam. Memories are constructed, not simply retrieved. Each time you remember something, your brain recreates the experience, which means memories can change over time. They're influenced by emotion, context, and suggestion. That's why two people can remember the same event very differently, and both be convinced they're right. Then there's consciousness, the grand mystery. We can measure brain activity, trace thoughts, observe behavior, but we still don't fully understand how subjective experience emerges. Why does a collection of cells and signals give rise to the feeling of being you? What's the biological basis of your inner monologue, your sense of self, your awareness of the world? This question sits at the crossroads of neuroscience, philosophy, psychology, and even physics. Some scientists study consciousness through brain imaging, looking for neural correlates, patterns that match up with specific experiences. Others approach it through altered states, sleep, anesthesia, meditation, psychedelics. Each offers a slightly different glimpse into how the brain constructs reality, and how it occasionally bends or breaks it. Speaking of bending reality, let's talk about perception. Your brain doesn't just record the world passively, it actively interprets it. The colors you see, the sounds you hear, the way you perceive time and space, all are processed, filtered, and shaped by your brain. Optical illusions show how easily this system can be fooled. The dress is blue and black. No, wait, it's white and gold. Your brain makes its best guess based on lighting, contrast, and context. And yet, despite all its complexity, the brain can be astonishingly fragile. A small stroke in one region can affect language or mobility. A traumatic injury can alter personality or memory. Degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's chip away at cognition, slowly dismantling identity. It's a painful reminder that our sense of self is built on biology, delicate, intricate, and vulnerable. But neuroscience also offers hope. Advances in brain imaging have revolutionized how we understand and treat mental illness. We can now see patterns associated with depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, not as character flaws but as brain conditions. Treatments like cognitive behavioral therapy and medication can help rewire thought patterns and rebalance neurochemistry. And new approaches, like transcranial magnetic stimulation, deep brain stimulation, and neurofeedback, are pushing the boundaries of what's possible. The brain isn't just a mystery to scientists, it's a muse to artists. It's inspired countless works of literature, music, and visual art. After all, everything ever written, painted, sculpted, or composed came from a brain. The brain creates culture, and culture in turn shapes the brain. Reading stories builds empathy. Music activates multiple brain areas at once. Dance combines motor coordination, rhythm, and emotion. Even laughter, that delightful involuntary spasm, has neurological roots and social significance. When you laugh, your brain releases endorphins and bonds you with others. It's one of the few things that lights up the brain like a fireworks show. Let's not forget dreams, the nightly movies produced by your resting brain. We still don't fully understand why we dream, but theories abound. Some suggest dreams help process emotions or consolidate memories. Others view them as random neural firing stitched together into semi-coherent narratives. Either way, dreams remind us that the brain is always working. Even when we're unconscious, it's painting surreal landscapes, hosting conversations with people we haven't seen in years, or inventing bizarre plots that involve talking fish and urgent deadlines. Then there's language, that remarkable system of symbols and sounds we use to share thoughts, coordinate actions, and complain about slow internet. The human brain is uniquely wired for language. Broca's area, near the frontal lobe, helps us produce speech. Wernicke's area, near the temporal lobe, helps us understand it. Together, they make possible everything from Shakespeare to emojis. And as if all of this weren't enough, the brain is also capable of metacognition, thinking about thinking. We can reflect on our own thoughts, analyze our behaviors, and wonder why we keep forgetting where we left our glasses when they're on our head. This ability to be aware of our awareness gives rise to philosophy, introspection, and, occasionally, mild existential crises at 2 a.m. Perhaps the most humbling thing about the brain is how little of it we control consciously. Most of your daily operations, breathing, digestion, balance, immune responses, happen without your input. Even many of your decisions are influenced by subconscious processes, instincts, biases, habits, gut feelings. You are, in a sense, both the captain and the crew, making choices and also watching them unfold. Despite centuries of study, the brain continues to surprise us. It can adapt after injury, grow new neurons, create entirely new experiences, and dream up worlds that never existed. It holds your memories, your values, your goals, your quirks. It lets you recognize faces, find patterns in clouds, fall in love, feel awe, and remember the lyrics to that song you haven't heard since high school. So as you lie there, listening quietly, consider the strange wonder that is your brain. It built this moment, constructed it from sound, language, memory, and imagination. It is reading between the lines, picturing images, connecting ideas. It is learning, absorbing, maybe even relaxing. And if it's starting to drift, letting thoughts float and fade like ripples in a pond, well, that's your brain too. Still working, even in rest. Still curious, even in calm. After all, it's not just what you think with, it's how you are. A soft, silent universe between your ears, ever active, ever amazing, ever mysterious. Not bad for 3 pounds of electrified pudding. And so, here we are, at the quiet end of our journey through the great discoveries of science. From electricity sparking through wires to spacecraft gliding silently across the void, from antibiotics that tame infections to algorithms that write poetry, we've followed the light of human curiosity as it illuminated the world and peeked into the shadows it sometimes cast along the way. If you're still awake, you've travelled through centuries of wonder, invention, triumph, and caution. If you drifted off somewhere around the Industrial Revolution, well, fair enough. This has been a long story and a soothing one, I hope. That's part of the charm of science. It doesn't always arrive in explosions and fireworks. Sometimes it's a gentle unravelling of mystery, a whisper of understanding, a candle in a long, dark hall. We began this story with a few simple questions. Where are you listening from? What time is it there? And perhaps most importantly, is this video so interesting that it accidentally kept you awake? If you're still with me, wide-eyed and curious, then I suppose we'll call that a good problem to have. And if you're half asleep, cocooned in blankets, with ideas dancing softly behind your eyelids, even better. That's the beauty of learning before sleep. The facts settle in gently. The brain turns them over, files them away, perhaps dreams about them in unexpected ways. And those questions from the start, they still matter now, maybe even more than they did before. Where are you listening from? Not just your location, but your moment in time, your place in this vast, ever-changing story of science. What time is it? Not just on the clock, but in the world, in our species' great experiment with knowledge and invention. And is it too interesting? Well, maybe. But if it is, that just means you still have questions, still have wonder, still have that spark, and that's the best place to be. Drifting towards sleep with your mind wide open. Thank you for listening, for learning, and for being part of this strange, beautiful, ongoing story we call science. Sleep well.